You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half-century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well. Only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Whatever you would like to talk about, the number is 202-808-9925. We're going to get to your calls in just a minute. First, I just wanted to bring you up to date on some of the news of the day, particularly some things that I think are particularly relevant and interesting. On the electoral front, on the who's gonna be the Democrat running for president actually front, some fascinating reporting by the Huffington Post. This is actually independent reporting that they've done. I tend not to visit Huffington Post very often because they're constantly throwing unwanted loud video at me, and it's just very difficult. But this, I made an exception, and Louise pointed this out to me, and I went over and checked out their website. And the headline is, mainstream media is blowing its coverage of Elizabeth Warren's DNA test. I wouldn't call it blowing it. I would call it slanting it. The Washington Post, for example, said, this is when Elizabeth Warren did her DNA test. The Washington Post said, enraged tribal groups and other minorities concerned about her reliance on the test to measure ethnicity. Injected uncertainty over the decision-making by Warren and her campaign staff. Whoa, sounds terrible, right? So how many elected Native leaders had the Washington Post and the New York Times talked to for this reporting that Native Americans were upset about Elizabeth Warren, pointing out that she has Cherokee ancestry? How many did they interview? Zero, not one. They interviewed some guy who hates Elizabeth Warren, but who's an Indian, but that's it. As the author of this piece writes, oops, neither of these studies included comments from any elected tribal leaders. The Post story didn't include comments from Native people at all. The Times story, one is a known Warren critic, and the other is a congresswoman-elect whose positive comments were buried, a stunning distortion. So then Huffington Post said, okay, well, let's find out what actual elected Native Americans, people who have been elected by their tribes to represent them, what they think about this. Presumably they'll represent tribal sentiment. HuffPost talked to a dozen tribal chiefs, Native politicians, researchers, and influencers to get a sense of why this narrative is taken off in the media. because Warren has been a strong ally to tribes. Are the tribal leaders and Native people mad? Turns out, after they interviewed all these tribal leaders, quote from the article, the answer to both those questions was overwhelmingly no. Richard Sneed, the principal chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, said, wait a second, let's get to some facts here. Senator Warren has always been a friend of tribes. We need all the allies we can get. He goes on to say she's never claimed to be a tribal citizen. She's never used her story of ancestry to her advantage. She just has a story of Native ancestry. He says, people tell me that all the time, everywhere I go. I don't think people are trying to gain some status by saying that. There are 573 federally recognized tribes in the United States. Only one has publicly said anything about Elizabeth Warren, and that's Sneed, who just said, I think it's great. Dennis Coker, the principal chief of the Delaware's Lenape Indian tribe, said, now this was a personal comment, not on behalf of the tribe, he said, someone who is proud of having that Native ancestor, no matter what percentage or what degree it is, in my view, that is a person I honor. I honor people who are looking for their roots. So where did this outrage come from? They could find absolutely no, I mean, there's just like no, this is stuff that the media just made up. I mean, is this trying to take down Elizabeth Warren? I mean, is that what's going on? They reached out to the Cherokee Nation. They talked to Principal Chief Bill John Baker. He agreed with Hoskins. He said, and I quote, she said that she has Native American ancestors. I wished every congressman and senator in the U.S. had a kinship or felt a kinship to the Cherokee Nation. And then the author of the piece says, if people really want to know how tribal leaders feel about Warren, they should watch the fiery speech she gave at the National Congress of American Indians in February. There were nearly 1,000 reputable tribal leaders there, and she stood there and was embraced. This is just, it's just an attempt to take her down, pure and simple. And right across the board, all the media is buying into this BS story. Meanwhile, over in the Trump administration, Mike Pence is getting a $10,000 raise today, as are most of Trump's cabinet members. At the same time, he's freezing the salaries of all federal workers, and 800,000 of them are getting totally screwed so that he can have his temper tantrum. His acting Interior Secretary, now that Ryan Zinke is going off to be prosecuted for all the crimes he committed, his acting Interior Secretary is registered lobbyist David Bernhardt. His Defense Secretary, acting Defense Secretary, is Defense Industry Patrick Shanahan. His EPA is being run by a registered coal lobbyist. Health and Human Services is being run by a registered pharmaceutical industry lobbyist. And the Department of Interior, David Bernhardt, an oil industry lobbyist, running our national parks and lands that might have oil. Does the word swamp come to mind? Two other things real quickly. One, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who the conservatives thought they would take her down by putting out a video of her dancing, really good dancing, by the way, when she was in college. And they said that it was when she was in high school, and I don't know why that makes a difference. And they said, oh, isn't this terrible? And it turns out it's gone viral. People love it. But anyhow, she was interviewed by Anderson Cooper for 60 Minutes, which I believe plays on Sundays. So I'm guessing that's going to come out this weekend. And Anderson Cooper said basically, how are you going to pay for your Green New Deal? You want to literally raise trillions of dollars to pay for a massive transformation of America's energy structure and create millions of new green jobs. How are you going to pay for that? Now, before I give you her answer, let me point out that Trump's tax cut shaved $1.5 trillion out of the federal budget. We scooped $1.5 trillion. And we're talking about over $1 trillion for Green New Deal structure. Just Trump's tax cut was $1.5 trillion. Bush's tax cut was $1 trillion. In today's dollars, Ronald Reagan's tax cut was over $1 trillion. So this is what Ocasio-Cortez said. She said, what's the problem with trying to push our technological capabilities to the furthest extent possible? There's an element where, yeah, people are going to start having to pay their fair share in taxes. What is a fair share? Could be as high as 60 to 70%. Now, obviously, you're not, in all probability, assuming that you are, not one of the 0.001%, you're not going to see that tax increase. That's a tax increase that would only hit people after they start making around somewhere between $3 and $10 million a year. In fact, that was what she specifically cited, dramatic increase on especially high earnings such as $10 million. Cooper says that's a pretty radical move, and she says, yeah, Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt were called radicals for their agenda. She said, I think it's only ever been radicals that have changed this country. So if that's what radical means, call me a radical. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking big stuff. Meanwhile, the first piece of legislation that was introduced in the House of Representatives yesterday, H.R. 1, has a whole bunch of pieces to it. And again, why this isn't at the top of the news? Well, it's because the news media refuses to cover issues, and this is pure issues. But this is what this is what the Democrats want to do, and we really should be having a national conversation about this, because the Republicans oppose every single one of these things. Number one, they want to streamline voter registration with automatic voting registration when you turn 18, same-day registration if you're not registered if you show up to vote. They think that could add 50 million new voters to the rolls. They want a commitment to restore the Voting Rights Act, or they're committing to. This is the bill that was gutted by John Roberts' Supreme Court in 2013 in the Shelby County decision. Nationwide early voting, 2 weeks of early voting nationwide. Citizen-funded elections. For every $1 you get from small donors, the government will match it with $6. Curb foreign funds in U.S. elections. Fix the Federal Election Commission. Stop extreme partisan gerrymandering with independent redistricting commissions like California has. Do away with paperless voting machines. Ethics reform, this is a big deal. Requiring the Supreme Court to adopt a code of ethics. Tightening the ethics rules in the White House and the executive branch. Disclosure of presidential tax returns for the previous 10 years as a condition of being able to run for president. And tightening restrictions on congressional conflicts of interest. There's a fascinating story in The Hill today. I believe it was The Hill, maybe it was Politico, about all these members of all these Republicans who are leaving Congress right now, and the great jobs they're getting on K Street for $1 million a year or more, lobbying on behalf of the tobacco industry and the pharmaceutical industry and the coal industry and the oil industry and weird industries you never even heard of. They're all out there. But anyhow, it's Anything Goes Friday. The board is full. We'll be picking up your calls right after this. It's 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls in just a moment. It is 16 minutes past the hour, helping you win the water cooler wars. Thom Hartmann here with you. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind today?
Tom, Happy New Year to you and your crew and your family.
Thank you. Back at you.
Thank you, Tom. You know, at the end of the show, you always say democracy is not a spectator sport.
Yeah.
I think yesterday we saw a perfect example. You should always refer to yesterday's event as an example why it's not a spectator sport. Everybody to participate. But what I wanted to ask you, with this power that we have right now, I'm just concerned that it might backfire on us. So I'm seeking your advice. Do you think it's wise to impeach Donald Trump or just focus aggressively on an American agenda that we're going to plant a seed for 2020? What was your opinion on that? Thank you.
I think both are important, Omar. I think that the American people are able to distinguish between a trumped-up charge, no pun intended, and a real charge. When Donald Trump was impeached, when Bill Clinton was impeached, a large percentage of Americans, including a lot of Republicans, were going, really? We're going to kick this guy out of office for having, consenting sex with an adult and lying about it? I mean, really? If you're going to do that, you had to kick Jack Kennedy out of office, Lyndon Johnson out of office. Probably Richard Nixon's the only guy who hasn't had an affair. Franklin Roosevelt had a mistress. Dwight Eisenhower had a mistress. I mean, really? So it was like, who cares, right? Well, that's a whole different thing from colluding with a foreign power to be elected president, from taking money from sketchy foreign governments and sketchy oligarchs and organized crime groups around the world in order to prop up your business enterprise, from basically selling the presidency, from engaging in naked fraud. I mean, lying to the American people some 7,000 times in 2 years. I think that Americans get it, that putting lobbyists in charge of agencies that are supposed to protect us from lobbyists. I think the American people get it, Omar, that Donald Trump has actually committed a whole series of actual real crimes. And I'm not just talking about, his over 20 women now who have come forward and said that he attacked them sexually. Because you could say, well, that's like the Bill Clinton thing. Well, no, Bill Clinton was not accused of assault. He was accused of lying about a relationship, a romantic relationship that went on and sexual, that went on for apparently a little less than a year. So I really think that, a member of Congress yesterday introduced or, dropped on the floor. It has to go through a process, but dropped articles of impeachment yesterday. And in fact, I should track those down and print them out and go through them with you, because Donald Trump is already on the record, right? I mean, just campaign finance violations, directing Michael Cohen to pay off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal so that it wouldn't get into the election. That's a crime. That's a felony crime. And that's a crime that led to his becoming president, which means his presidency is illegitimate. If it was just that he was impeached for, I get it. Now, this is before the election. Bill Clinton was lying about having sex with Monica Lewinsky, after he'd been reelected, in fact. This was in 1999. So I just, for those who want to draw that comparison, I just don't think it works. But I think that impeachment would highlight his crimes, and that's a good thing. Welcome back. 21 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Neil in Valparaiso, Indiana. I'm not saying that quite right, am I, Neil?
I think you got it pretty good. Valparaiso, Indiana.
Valparaiso. Okay, great. Yeah. What's up?
This on a topic you had yesterday. Denise Mueller-Kornick, last September, she broke the land speed record for on a bicycle. Huh. And it's getting reported. Yes, she did 184 mile an hour. The record before was 1996. It was 168 mile an hour.
On a bicycle?
On a bicycle. Yes, she did hit a car in front of her, breaking the wind, but she powered herself to 184 mile an hour.
Wow. That's amazing.
And it truly is for a human being. And she's 45 years old and got kids at home, and she trained for this for 6 years of her life. And it's just reported as a woman's record, not the world's record.
Oh, so apropos of our conversation yesterday about the misogyny and its impact on elections and things, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so I just can't believe it. It's like she'll probably be remembered all her life for setting that record. It's just like in the movie Sully. He says, I 30-some years she flew spectacularly, and he's always remembered for those last 90 seconds of that flight that went down the Potomac.
Right.
It's just amazing. This isn't remembered as the all-time fastest woman's record, and it's not even reported in this country. I had to find this out in an English magazine. So it's just.
Is she an American?
Yeah, she's American. Yeah,
amazing. I mean, that's a made for TV story. I mean, that's the kind of thing you'd expect to see on the fluff shows. The network morning shows kind of thing. Well, interesting. Neil, thanks for the heads up on that. It's fascinating. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, Professor. Sorry about yesterday. That was on me. Listen, you know what Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Mr. O'Rourke have in common? They all have a humane narrative, and it's going to be difficult for the media to silence all of them. Okay, you got 400 families that own 80% of the wealth in this country, which means they also control the narratives. And how do they do that? They got these false narratives, linguistic facades, and euphemistic phrases. That's the language of our media today. But because we don't hear about stuff, folks, don't believe me. Stuff is going on. Stuff is going on. And the elites right now, they know they're in trouble because, they can shut down one candidate. Maybe they can hurt another candidate. But they can't distort the whole message every day. And this is a blue wave. Folks, if you've got despair, get excited because a new wave of happiness and joy is coming to this country.
I agree. I am very optimistic. I am very hopeful. In some ways, I think that Susan Sarandon's prediction has come true, Morris, and Donald Trump's presidency has showed us the blood-drenched themes of the Republicans and their party, and I think Americans are waking up. I really do. Michael in Los Angeles. Hey, Michael. Thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Good morning, sir. Hey, I wanted to talk about what I perceive as this wall as being racist, but nobody is bringing up the fact that Canada actually has 151,000 miles of unsecured ocean border and then 5,500 miles of border with the U.S., and he doesn't want to put a wall there. It's obviously not about security. It's about racism.
Yeah, there's very few brown people in Canada. And
yeah, of course.
I mean, it's like...
But 151,000 miles of unsecured border in Canada with the ocean, anybody could cross, including Russians, but I guess he doesn't care about that.
Yeah. No, this is all dog whistle politics. It's just that simple. This is Richard Nixon's war on drugs, or war on crime. It's George Herbert Walker Bush's war on drugs. That's what this is, and it's all code for those people. Michael, thank you. Well said. Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Morris is right. The blue wave is here. It's coming, and we're not going to be stopped. We're going to keep going here. I do want to talk about Ocasio-Cortez's idea there and stuff. Mm-hmm. But just a quick thing I would like to point out, too. With these, if the Sherman Antitrust Act is not being enforced at all. AT&T owns HBO, and they own DirecTV. And they've permanently removed HBO from the Dish network since November 1st. And I think they're trying to run them out of business, and it's very concerning.
That's interesting.
And then you look at the airlines and stuff, and we all know where that goes.
Right.
Now, going to this Ocasio-Cortez, I want to talk about Liz Cheney yesterday got on the Congress floor, and she was talking about the fraud of socialism. And, I'd have to agree to some degree here. Because, yes, the mega wealthy have been riding on the gravy train for far too long, and they've been hoovering up all the gains, and they've been the beneficiaries of the low tax rate since our Saint Reagan was anointed. And whilst Joe and Mary, average person, they get, kind of hosed every which way till Sunday with each passing year. This fraud and heist needs to end here now.
Yeah, I agree. And Cheney is... It's virtually obscene, her rant. But I guess that's the Cheney family. By the way, see the movie Vice. It's great. Steve, thanks a lot for the call. And by the way, Alexandria Ocasio, by saying taxes should go as high as 70%, that's what LBJ lowered the top tax rate to, 74%.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And that was like in 1967. I mean, from the 1930s up until 67, the top tax rate had been 91%. We'll be back. For our book today, we're reading from Elon Papp's book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. This is from the preface. It's titled The Red House. The Red House was a typical early Tel Avivian building, the pride of the Jewish builders and craftsmen who toiled over in the 1920s. It had been designed to house the head office of the local Workers' Council. It remained such until toward the end of 1947 it became the headquarters of the Haganah, the main Zionist underground militia in Palestine. Located near the sea on Yarkon Street in the northern part of Tel Aviv, the building formed another fine addition to the first Hebrew city on the Mediterranean, the White City as its literati and pundits affectionately called it. For in those days, unlike today, the immaculate whiteness of his houses still bathed the town as a whole in the opulent brightness so typical of Mediterranean port cities of that era and that region. It was a sight for sore eyes, elegantly fusing Bauhaus motifs with native Palestinian architecture in an admixture that was called Levantine, in the least derogatory sense of the term. Such too was the Red House, its simple rectangular features graced with frontal arches that framed the entrance and supported the balconies of its two upper stories. It was either its association with the workers' movement that had inspired the adjective red, or its pinkish tinge that it acquired during sunset that had given the house its name. The former was more fitting as the building continued to be associated with the Zionist version of socialism when, in the 1970s, it became the main office for Israel's kibbutzim movement. Houses like this, important historical remnants of the mandatory period, prompted UNESCO in 2003 to designate Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site. Today, the house is no longer there, a victim of development, which has razed this architectural relic to the ground to make room for a car park next to the new Sheraton Hotel. Thus, in this street, too, no traces left of the White City, which it has slowly transmogrified into the sprawling, polluted, extravagant metropolis that is the modern Tel Aviv. In this building on a cold Wednesday afternoon, 10 March 1948, a group of 11 men, veteran Zionist leaders, together with young military Jewish officers, put the final touches on a plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That same evening, military orders were dispatched to the units on the ground to prepare for the systematic expulsion of Palestinians from vast areas of the country. The orders came from a detailed description of the methods to be employed to forcibly evict the people: large-scale intimidation, laying siege to and bombarding villages and population centers, setting fire to homes, properties, goods, expulsion, demolition, and finally planting mines among the rubble to prevent any of the expelled inhabitants from returning. Each unit was issued with its own list of villages and neighborhoods as the targets of the master plan. Codenamed Plan D, Dalet in Hebrew, this was the fourth and final version of less substantial plans that outlined the fate the Zionists had in store for Palestine and consequently for its native population. The previous three schemes had articulated only obscurely how the Zionist leadership contemplated dealing with the presence of so many Palestinians living in the land that the Jewish national movement coveted as its own. This fourth and last blueprint spelled it out clearly and unambiguously. Quote, "The Palestinians have to go," end quote. In the words of one of the first historians to note the significance of that plan, Simcha Flapan, the military campaign against the Arabs, including the conquest and destruction of the rural areas, was set forth in the Haganah's Plan Dalet. The aim for the plan was in fact the destruction of both the rural and urban areas of Palestine. As the first chapters of this book will attempt to show, this plan was both the inevitable product of the Zionist ideological impulse to have an exclusively Jewish presence in Palestine, and a response to developments on the ground once the British cabinet had decided to end the mandate. Clashes with local Palestinian militias provided the perfect context and pretext for implementing the ideological vision of an ethnically cleansed Palestine. The Zionist policy was first based on retaliation against Palestinian attacks in February of 1947, and it transformed into an initiative to ethnically cleanse the country as a whole in March of 1948. Once the decision was taken, it took 6 months to complete the mission. When it was over, more than half of Palestine's native population, close to 800,000 people, had been uprooted. 531 villages had been destroyed, and 11 urban neighborhoods had been emptied of their inhabitants. The plan decided upon on 10 March 1948, and above all its systematic implementation in the following months, was a clear-cut case of ethnic cleansing operation regarded under international law today as a crime against humanity. After the Holocaust, it has become impossible to conceal large-scale crimes against humanity. Our modern communication-driven world, especially since the upsurge of electronic media, no longer allows human-made catastrophes to remain hidden from the public eye or to be denied. And yet one such crime has been erased almost totally from the global public memory: the disposition of the Palestinians in 1948 by Israel. This, the most formative element in the modern history of the land of Palestine, has ever since been systematically denied and is still today not recognized as an historical fact, let alone acknowledged as a crime that needs to be confronted politically as well as morally. Ethnic cleansing is a crime against humanity, and the people who perpetrate it today are considered criminals to be brought before special tribunals. It may be difficult to decide how one ought to refer to or deal with in the legal sphere those who initiated and perpetrated ethnic cleansing in Palestine in 1948. But it's impossible to reconstruct their crimes. Anyhow, it continues the ethnic cleansing of Palestine.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. You know, years ago, I would, on this program, well, I mean, for years, actually, I should say, I've been saying, we need to just repeal the Reagan tax cut. You know, Ronald Reagan took the top tax rate from 74%, and by the way, it had been 91% from the 1930s, right through 1960, whatever it was, 68, 67, whatever year it was, LBJ raised the taxes, or lowered the tax rate. And he lowered it from 91% down to 74%, where it stood until Reagan came along and he lowered it to 25%, which is exactly what Warren Harding did in 1920, which kicked off the Roaring Twenties and led right to the crash in 1929. And I've been saying forever, you know, just repeal the damn Reagan tax cuts and all the other ones subsequent to it. And here, you know, AOL is, or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, yeah. There's a new acronym for her, so. Anyhow, Tarek in Griffin, Georgia. It's Anything Goes Friday. What's up, Tarek?
Hey, Tom, I watch your show a lot, and I just want to say that I get a sense from you that you think that there is an attack on Elizabeth Warren, but in my opinion, I think Elizabeth Warren will go down in history the same way. She will go down with a loss just the same way Hillary Clinton lost. We both know that Washington is sick with the mucus of incrementalism. In the same way Hillary Clinton, with her incrementalism, she in her primary, she actually wanted the universal health care, but she waited a year later and ran with Obama, and she lost that year. The same way Elizabeth Warren, I think her year was 2016, but with the way
but Hillary Clinton was always a middle-of-the-road Democrat, and you know, perfectly happy hanging out with billionaires and multimillionaires and taking money from them and doing things collaboratively with them. Elizabeth Warren is the exact opposite. She's a genuine progressive. She's been fighting against the top 1% her whole entire life. You know, she used to be a bankruptcy law professor at Harvard, where she was, you know, teaching how these people screw us. Other than they're both being women, Tarek, and Democrats, I don't get what you're talking about.
I don't. It's not the policy. It's the choice. It's the. We know that incrementalism is sickening. In
what is incrementalistic, to coin a word, about Elizabeth Warren's policies?
No, okay. We know that she's probably in my opinion, the second best to Bernie Sanders in the Senate. But when it comes to the ability to conform, and Elizabeth Warren has shown the ability, ability to conform, just like I think she.
Give me one example.
Give me
one example where Elizabeth Warren compromised her values.
She did not speak out on DAPL.
On what?
She's boasting about her Native American with this DNA test, but she neglected to stand up for Native Americans in real life with DAPL. So it breathes fire into the idea that maybe she's using this as a political football, which we know
I don't think
candidates
she is.
for expediency, which we know candidates do all the time.
Yeah, and candidates do that all the time, but I'm not buying it. I'm just not buying it. Monica in Raleigh, North Carolina, and this is not an endorsement of Elizabeth Warren, by the way. I intend to give a lot of attention to every Democratic candidate when they announce that there's a good chance that they're going to be running, opening exploratory committees and whatnot. Elizabeth Warren did that this week, so I've been talking about her a lot. I think she's great, but I think there's a lot of great candidates. Monica, what's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to talk about the problem, the government shutdown. And what I think needs to happen is that the government workers need to go on strike. All of them across the board need to go on strike until Congress passes a bill that says that when there is a government shutdown, nobody in the Congress or the president will be paid either.
But see, if Congress did that, first of all, let's be clear about this. The government shutdowns have been being done by Republicans, right? This is a Republican stunt. And the whole point of it is to take hostage federal workers. So the federal workers are the pawns, that the Republicans are using to advance their interests. And I don't see where diminishing the pain to the federal workers is going to do anything other than cause Republicans to find somebody else to be the pawn.
Well, first of all, at this point, do they have anything to lose by going on strike?
Yeah, they do. It's against the law in some of the areas. This is how Reagan fired the air traffic controllers. And there's a lot to lose. Plus, they would potentially lose their jobs.
So their unions have no power.
Well, they have negotiating power, and in some sectors they could probably strike. But I think that this is something that's best handled in the ballot box. This is not the federal workers versus the United States. It's the federal workers versus the Republican Party, and has been for 30 years or so, and really 40, I guess 50 years since Reagan. And so that's what we need to do. Monica, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. It's an idea. I mean, certainly I agree with you that the federal workers need to be organized and they need to be standing up, and they are starting to speak out. Some of the unions are speaking out. Monica, thank you. David in Seattle. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, good morning. I just wanted to call and thank you so much for talking about Rhea and Eisler's book, The Chalice and the Blade. Because I was working my backyard yesterday, listening to your show, and I think it was one of the best broadcasts you've done in quite some time. To have this conversation about the resurgence of feminine power, which I think is what we're witnessing. And like you say, it's a conversation that needs to happen all over the country, and especially for men to listen up. I wanted to say that she seemed to have accurately predicted the rise of the first Gulf War after her book was published, and the sequel to that called Sacred Pleasure. I forget the long name of the title, but it's about the politicization of sex.
Yeah, we're talking Rhiannon Eisler's work.
Anyway.
She's absolutely brilliant. I know Rhiannon, and I know her husband David Loy. They're brilliant, wonderful people.
Yeah, amazing. So anyway, she predicted the rise of the war because of the rise of what she called the Gylanic, G-Y-L-A-N-I-C, energy in society. When that starts to rise, and people of color and other women start to rise up and demand their rights, the new wars sometimes in the offing is what she proposed, and I think that's a lot of what's going on at the moment. There's a lot of saber rattling, as people say. We want to be respected, and Trump is saying, "Oh no, we're going to make business as usual." So anyway, thank you. I wanted to bring that up. It was just,
you're welcome. Thanks for the acknowledgement. And I think misogyny is a big issue. And you wonder, and David, thank you for the call. Sometimes you wonder, why is there not more discussion of this in the media? And then you learn that Les Moonves, for example, had 2 full-time employees on the payroll at CBS, whose only job, 2 young women, whose only job was to periodically come up to his office and service his sexual desires in his locked office. And it was an open secret. His secretary knew it. All the people around him knew it. And that's the guy running the entire network. And you wonder, why the network is not, programming, hey, wait, is there a problem with misogyny? Yeah, right. Mike in Lomita, California, it says here you disagree with me, so you go to the front of the line. What's up, Mike?
Well, I wasn't disagreeing with you in particular. I just wanted to complain about the decorum, civic decorum, and all these people who are insulting Donald Trump, because he made a central part of his campaign that he would build a wall and Mexico would pay for it. So anyone who talks about the U.S. taxpayers funding this wall is calling Donald Trump a phony and a con man. And with all that he knows about real estate law, I'm sure there must be some way he's figured out that you can build a wall and make your neighbor pay for it.
So are you saying that the Republicans being supportive of Trump having you and me and the other taxpayers in this country pay for his little racist symbol, his wall, that really those Republicans are simply pointing out his hypocrisy?
I'm saying anyone who says that the U.S. government should pay for this Mexican wall is calling Donald Trump a phony.
Yeah, okay, there you go. Well, there's a bunch of them in the House and the Senate. Thank you, Mike. Amen. Amen. Not so much of a disagreement, but this is the point I think Nancy Pelosi made. Well, I was interested to see her actually inject morality into this morning. You know, a reporter said, would you give them even $1 for the wall? And she said, no, it's not a moral thing. The wall is immoral. It's not who we are as Americans. It's amazing. We'll be right back with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday on your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. And welcome back. Jay in Dillon, South Carolina. Hey, Jay, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom, very long-time listener, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
So I have some very intelligent friends of mine who buy into the narrative that, you know, the deep state is what's running things, and you know this one, and that Donald Trump is anti-deep state. And they give a number of examples, and more recently, the withdrawal of troops from Syria and Afghanistan. And I don't know what to say to them. I don't buy into it, but how would you respond to them?
Well, first of all, there's varying definitions of deep state. I mean, the kind of real definition, the definition that has been accepted for a long time, is, and it's not a pejorative, it's not a bad thing, is that it is all of those people who are full-time government employees who are not political appointees, essentially. That right. The state continues to run regardless of who's there. The Social Security continues to write checks. IRS continues to collect money. The USDA continues to inspect food. All those kinds of things. So that's you know, generally that's referred to as the administrative state. Steve Bannon came out and said that one of the goals of the Trump administration is to, and I quote, dismantle the administrative state, which is basically take apart the American government. Now, they would do this on behalf of mostly polluting industries, you know, or people who want to loot our public lands. You know, this is just so basically criminal. But I don't see, you know, and of course the pejorative one is like, oh my God, there's all these people who are, you know, permanent, you know, like the FBI director who doesn't like Trump. You know, he's a Republican, but he doesn't like Trump. So, you know, they kind of weirdly twist it into this kind of, you know, it's like anthropomorphizing it or something, giving it a personality, you know, which is nonsense. And I don't see any relationship between any deep state, regardless of how you define it, and our foreign policy, at least with regard to Syria and Afghanistan, and you know, pulling out some troops. I mean, you know, I don't get it. What's the critique? What, you know, when you say what are you talking about? What do they say?
Yeah, so it's actually, they seem to go cognitively dissonant. You know, like they seem to have this boogeyman mentality. And I always liken it to the war machine and, you know, the big oil guys and so forth. And I say, but, you know, he's satisfied all those. You know, he's feeding them. So who is this deep state you're talking about? And then they go, you know, blank on me, sort of. You know?
Well, the other thing that we only have limited information on, because a lot of these numbers are classified, is how many of the troops who are being pulled out of various places, Iraq is a huge example of this, are being replaced by Blackwater-type contractors.
Yeah, see, that's what I think the deep state is. I think it's, you know, special interest. And I think
well, that's a corrupt state.
Sir?
That's the corrupt state. I mean, that's
the corrupt state. Yeah. And I've always felt like, you know, they're twisting it. You were talking about anthropomorphism, however the term was, that I feel like they twisted it because it's really the progressives who are addressing the, you know, those, like you were talking about, the corrupt state, those special interests hidden in the shadows, not Donald Trump. You know, so I think they've twisted it somehow.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, you want a deep state that is corrupting America and destroying our country. Look at Ryan Zinke. Look at Scott Pruitt. Look at the guys that Donald Trump has put in charge of these agencies that are supposed to protect the assets of the American people and the health and welfare of the American people. I mean, if you want a deep state, I would point there. Jay, thanks for the call. It's a good one. I appreciate the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 12 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Matt, listening to Real Talk 910 in San Francisco. Matt in Napa, California. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to talk about the Syrian conflict real quick, but if I could, just your conversation about the deep state, just name drop Peter Dale Scott real quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And I think he was partially responsible for that term. On Syria, I mean, the thing I wanted to talk about was somewhat of the backdrop of the issues of the chemical weapons attacks, the American reporters that are actually there, the international bodies on the chemical weapons attack, the one in 2016, the 2 points I would make. Number one, we supposedly already had a big showdown with Russia and Syria about a chemical weapons regime, or inspectors being in there and that all being taken care of, and why that was out the window that they had chemical weapons was really not really addressed very much. The Russian versions of events were that the bomb that the Russian plane dropped was dropped on a terrorist chemical facility, and that was actually what was responsible. That didn't seem to be taken up much by the American media. It doesn't seem like there's very many reporters there. Reporters that are there that seem to be reporting. Eva Bartlett, another woman that, a lot of interesting information on the white helmets that seems contrary to the general narrative.
Yeah, the problem is you're absolutely right. There are very few reporters there, and we don't know what is Syrian propaganda versus what is actually going on. One of the things that I find most interesting about all this is this story. This is by Jonathan Vankin. The headline is 4 months after threat to seize Trump Towers Istanbul, Trump gave in to Turkey's Syria troop pullout demand. And this is Donald Trump, according to a CNN investigative report published on Sunday, made his announcement that he ordered a full withdrawal after a phone call with Erdogan. And where to go? Erdogan said on Friday that they will soon launch a major military operation against the Kurds. The whole point here, here it is. The call to seize Trump Towers Istanbul came from Turkey's IYI party, the Good Party in English, which implored Erdogan to seize the buildings as retaliation for U.S. sanctions against two top officials in Erdogan's regime. So that's something that Erdogan is holding over Trump. And then this story from ABC News: Turkey masses troops near Kurdish-held Syrian town. They're getting ready for an invasion. What do you think of that?
Yeah, not good. And there was some insinuation that the chemical attacks, I guess 2013, the first major attack, that there was Turkish fingerprints on that attack as well. So, I mean, the Turks are clearly a concern.
And that it might have been a false flag operation in that context.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. And I don't hold a strong opinion about to what extent and how many of these things on either side have been, false flag or manipulation operations versus, genuine, horrible human rights violations, because it's just so hard to know. But, this is just a terrible and brutal war. I know that much. Matt, thanks a lot for the call. Ronnie in Mesquite, Nevada. Hey, Ronnie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First of all, thank you for your show, and thank you for answering my call. I live in a relatively small rural town, and I was reading in our local newspaper yesterday that laws are being formulated now, or regulations are being formulated now as part of the new trade regulations that might be coming up, where they're trying to stop for 10 years American citizens getting any discounts on drugs from other countries like Canada. And this, to me, despite the normal corruption that we see every day, seems like almost an attack on the American people.
Well, this is already the case, Ronnie. You can. People order from Canadian pharmacies all the time through the internet, but you can't legally do it, and it's technically illegal. And I remember back, in the 90s when we lived in Vermont, Bernie Sanders every Saturday morning was organizing busloads of people in downtown Montpelier and Burlington, who would then, and mostly elderly people on Medicare, who would then drive up to Canada to buy their pharmaceuticals. But you had to actually go there physically. But that's where we're at right now. Are you saying that the Republicans want to extend that profit protection for the pharmaceutical industry for another 10 years? Is that what's going on here?
Yes.
I missed this story.
That's what I'm reading, and I don't know if it's true, but that's what I'm reading.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's been the law for 40, 50 years. And, for a long time anyway. I'm surprised that, Republicans, obviously, it's a corrupt, sold-out party that has no soul and no principles and basically no ideas other than take what you can get and get rich as fast as you can, and keep the rubes flipped out using racism and misogyny. I mean, that's basically what they're up to. And so, one of the industries that pays the Republicans very, very well is the pharmaceutical industry. And so they're going to do everything they can to protect those profits. I mean, that's what they did with Medicare Part D. It was a $600 billion subsidy to the pharmaceutical industry, taking the money out of Medicare. So it was a twofer for the Republicans. A, they got to reduce the viability of Medicare, and B, they handed billions of dollars off to their buddies who would then cycle them back to them as campaign contributions. Ronnie, if you can find that story on the internet and just tweet the link to me, I'd appreciate it. That's the best way to get something to me fast. I do read my Twitter feed, and I'd love to see the story. Ronnie, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Ted in Black Diamond, Washington. Hey, Ted, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom.
Hey.
I hope the day is doing well for you.
No complaints.
And I'm talking about the government shutdown. One idea, you have a lot of constitutional amendments thrown at this program, but what I would suggest that would also have political points, because it's such a high bar to pass, would be a constitutional amendment against any group, party, or individual closing down the government, that the government cannot be shut down as a constitutional amendment. And, I mean, even if it doesn't get passed, make the other side argue against it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how you could do that in a way that would comport with the Constitution. Perhaps you could pass a law that said that if any federal agency is running out of funds, their funds are automatically extended for a 6-month period or a 3-month or a 1-month period, whatever.
Well, the wording,
the wording
would
is
have to be worked out, but the intent that's important. It's it's when congressmen swear to protect our country against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Right.
To me, I think our biggest problem right now are our domestic enemies, many of which are within the government right now.
I agree, and like the entire Republican Party, I wince at the use of the word enemies. Like Donald Trump calling the media the enemies of the people, but
enemies of the people, the press.
Yeah, but at least not advocates. I mean, the whole idea of having an elected representative body, a group of people who the majority of the people say, yes, these are the people we want to represent us, is that those people will then represent the interests of the folks who voted them in. And that's, routinely done by Democrats, by the majority of Democrats anyway, and it's routinely not done by Republicans. Republicans consistently, vote for and promote policies that screw their own voters. And it's just amazing that people are still voting for them. But I think that the big thing that Republicans have going for them is that the media, the television programs, in particular the Sunday shows, but also the news programs, will not talk about issues in a way that would highlight the differences between the Republican, perspective on everything from health care to, whether your bank should be able to rip you off versus the Democratic perspective on those. And so they can continue to get away with this stuff because I think the average voter just doesn't know how badly Republicans are screwing them. So
right. That's why I think we should take that tactic off the table, closing down the government every time one side doesn't get their way.
Yeah, well, you're taking a weapon away from the Republicans. It may be a weapon, though, that they've used so often it's actually starting to hurt them more than their opponents. But that said, I think that the ultimate power is at the ballot box. We just need to vote these guys out of office. But your point is well taken, Ted. I'm not sure how to do the language, but I'm sure it could be done. Thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with more of your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas.
You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. We're reading today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for White Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amax, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to Anything Goes Friday. We've been talking about Elizabeth Warren. Jay Inslee, by the way, has announced that he has also launched an exploratory committee to see about running for president of the United States, as has Marianne Williamson. Marianne has been on the program. We're extending an invitation to Governor Inslee. He's the governor of Washington State. He basically wants to run on the Green New Deal. I mean, period, full stop. He's all about preventing humanity from becoming extinct, which, you know, is a pretty big deal. We've been talking about how the media, you know, with Elizabeth Warren and this DNA test, it turns out that the Washington Post and the New York Times didn't interview even one single elected tribal leader. So the Huffington Post sent some reporters out to interview tribal leaders. You know, what did you think about Elizabeth Warren getting a DNA test? And this is what they had to say. For example, Mr. Sneed, Richard Sneed, is the principal chief of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. He said, wait a second, let's get to some facts here. Senator Warren has always been a friend of tribes, and we need all the allies we can get. She's never claimed to be a tribal citizen. She never used her ancestry to her advantage. She just has a story of native ancestry. People tell me that all the time, everywhere I go. I don't think people are trying to gain status by saying that. That's what he has to say. Dennis Coker, the principal chief of Delaware's Lenape Indian tribe, said, someone who's proud of having that native ancestor, no matter what percentage or what degree it is, in my view, that is a person I honor. I honor people who are seeking their roots. And this is principal chief of the Cherokee Nation, Bill John Baker. She has said that she has Native American ancestors. I wish every congressman and senator in the U.S. had a kinship or felt a kinship to the Cherokee Nation. So apparently the people who were upset with Elizabeth Warren were Republicans. And that's all, literally, all the media chose to focus on. It's astonishing. Anyhow, there's a lot of other things in the news. You know, what the HR 1 yesterday, I went through a whole long thing on that in the last hour. We'll get back to some of this stuff as we continue through the program. But back to Anything Goes Friday here. Monty in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hey, Monty, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Happy New Year to you and your family.
Thank you. Back at you. It's the first weekend of the new year. It's
yes.
It's going to be a great time.
You know, you watched yesterday and you see Hakeem Jeffries, you know, the passion, how the Democratic Party has evolved. You look at the Republicans, everything they view, whether it's the EPA, women's rights, LGBTQ community, is straight out of the 70s, other than Russia, right? Because, in the 70s and 80s, we were anti-Russia. Now they're all for it. But what alarms me the most, Tom, and you could speak to this better than I can as someone who knows the history, how do the American people keep falling for the same lie, right? There was no weapons of destruction in Iraq. Bush got us to go to a war. There is no threat by immigration, and Trump's going to build this wall to pocket, to put money in the pockets of his cronies. How do we keep falling for the same fear based on no evidence? You're 100% more likely to be shot and killed by a white domestic terrorist in America than an undocumented immigrant. How do the American people not evolve with their intelligence?
Yeah, with the complicity of the media. I mean, you just have to acknowledge that the media does not call out Republican policies. They're afraid to come right out and say, and in fact, you won't even hear these conversations on the Sunday shows, which, I for years I've joked, if it's Sunday, it's meet the Republicans. They won't ask these direct questions like, do you still want to privatize Social Security? Do you still think that Medicare should be, taken off the government and put onto United Healthcare? Do you still think that oil companies and refineries should be able to put more poison in the air? They won't go there. And the reason they won't go there is because they know that if the Republicans start feeling uncomfortable, they won't come on their programs. And if they don't come on
so
their
how do we fight it, Tom? Besides listening to shows like yours, besides reading,
That's it, Monty. We've got to become our own media, and this is where social media has some, provides some help. Although, again, I don't think that Mark Zuckerberg is our great savior either, or the guy who is the CEO of Twitter. But, talking to your friends, talking to everybody getting the message out. I'm very encouraged by the fact that the one program on MSNBC that does the best job, in my mind, of actually talking about the issues is Rachel Maddow's show, and it's now the #1 show on cable news. I think that should tell everybody in the industry, this is what you need to do.
Right. People are watching the truth. They're not watching fake news, So that's what I don't understand, why the media is so reluctant, because Rachel's show is making money and the most people are watching it.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. But, keep in mind, first of all, who owns NBC? And this isn't just to pick on NBC. NBC is owned by Comcast.
Right.
CNN is owned by AT&T. It's like, do you expect these giant monopolistic corporations to really want there to be conversations about giant monopolistic corporations? I don't think so. Exactly. So, but that's that's kind of a whole nother thing, as a media monopoly issue. But I think that the lack of GOP values that you're identifying and concerned about, Monty, is very, very real. The party is a bunch of sellouts. And yeah, it was such a contrast. Yesterday, Louise commented to me, wow, watching the Democrats is like watching real people. And watching the Republicans, somebody made the comment on TV that, it's like watching the 1956, business roundtable or something like that, so it's out of Mad Men. Mad Men, the TV show. It's bizarre.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Yeah,
all right, Tom, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Monty. Good to hear from you. John in San Francisco, listening on 910 Real Talk. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Happy New Year, Tom, and hopeful New Year for us all in the Democratic portion of the world. By the way, I bought 6 copies of your book, Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, and gave them out for Christmas. And I'm really happy about doing that.
Well,
Grateful for you to redo the stats on it and stuff, because I read the book a few years ago. Anyway, I wanted to talk about Nancy Pelosi's press conferences and get back to my old rant, which is that the Democrats need to up their game on messaging, and they need to have daily press conferences where they give 5-minute, briefings on what they did today and what they're doing and what the Republicans aren't doing and what they are doing.
They are doing those things right now, John. They're literally, there are Democrats holding multiple press conferences every single day, 7 days a week in Washington, D.C. and around the country. The thing is that generally they don't get much coverage.
Well, what I'm suggesting is they do it at the same time between 4 and 5 o'clock East Coast time, so that they can go right to it. They always got it, and you can change around the Senate and Congress people, have 2 people do it from the Democratic Party, and always be able to rely on them for messaging. And to put the pressure and the ball back in their court. On that note, yesterday there was a press conference, and you mentioned it a few minutes ago, with Nancy Pelosi, where she was questioned whether she would give $1 to the wall. And the guy that asked that was slightly off camera, and he started to antagonize her. He was going down the road with, well, would you give her $1 million? Well, you know, and then he was trying to do that whole routine.
He's trying to negotiate,
with,
yeah.
Yeah, and she cut him off real fast. But I'd like to know who that reporter is, because he was going down a dirty road.
Yeah.
And he was antagonizing her, and it wasn't meant for, you know, he wasn't doing it for good purposes. He was being, you know, he was trying to sabotage her.
Yeah, but
anyway.
freedom of the press means freedom of a partisan press as well. So, I mean, you know, this is what Harry Truman was talking about when he said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. I mean, you know, Nancy Pelosi knows how to deal with Fox News reporters.
Right. Well, one other thing I would like to say is that we need to put a clock on the elder portions of our party who are in Congress and Senate, and start giving more assignments to the younger members of the staff. And I think we should jump over Steny Hoyer and look for a replacement for Nancy, because I think she ought to retire in a couple of sessions. She's doing a great job, and I'm not trying to, you know, promote something for the future, but they really need to kind of change the game and get rid of the seniority thing.
Yeah,
and start pushing younger.
I get that, but she doesn't have that position merely by seniority. She has that position by talent, by virtue of talent, and arguably that's the case with Steny Hoyer. I'm not a big fan of Steny Hoyer. I am a huge fan of Nancy Pelosi. We'll see how it all shakes out, John. It's up to the party. Thanks a lot for the call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the first Anything Goes Friday of 2019. Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Dennis watching us on YouTube in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Back at you.
My question to you is, do you feel it's necessary to have the government completely control and nationalize the largest banks in the United States? Or do you feel they should be private but regulated through Glass-Steagall, of course, and breaking up the biggest banks in the country?
I think having the government-owned banks is a mistake. And, you know, without revisiting the election of 1832, I just think that banks are one of those categories of things where they should be either privately owned or the really good alternative to banks, and which is how I do my banking, is through a credit union. And because they're local community agencies that you actually become an owner of as you put money into their bank.
And one question. If you were to break up the big banks, do you feel it would be wise to break them up by having them only operate in one state, or would you consider, of course you can do it through other ways, like splitting up J.P. Morgan Chase into an investment part, a wholesale bank for corporate clients, and a retail bank for insured deposits? So what way?
Yeah. Well, the latter is what you're describing is what Glass-Steagall was, Dennis, and I think that's an absolute necessary first step, period, regardless of anything else. In terms of breaking the banks up, it used to be that banks were largely regional or statewide businesses, and
they were only allowed to operate in one state.
Well, it wasn't just that they weren't allowed to. Each state has its own banking regulatory boards, and each state has its own rules about banks, and so it was just a hassle for banks to operate in more than one state. But as businesses became more trans-state, banks had to become more trans-state to meet their needs, And so now you've got, the big banks are operating pretty much, as far as I know, in every state. I'm not sure exactly what to do about that. And
so you don't feel the banks should be nationalized completely?
No, absolutely not. I think that there's an entire realm of business where it's not inappropriate to call for them to become worker-owned co-ops and things like that. Essentially like credit unions are for banks, or member-owned co-ops.
What are the problems you see with nationalizing the banks? What would that be? Why would that be?
That they would be subject to political pressure. This is like right now you've got some agencies that are very large, very powerful, and have a lot of influence. The Securities and Exchange Commission. Well, actually, the SEC and the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, have both been highly politicized by the Republicans over the last decade and a half, to the point that the FEC is no longer prosecuting crimes that have to do with elections, which are largely overwhelmingly committed by Republicans. And the Securities and Exchange Commission, has for years now, Mary Jo White. I mean, we ran a campaign on this program to convince Mary Jo White that she should have a certain level of transparency among publicly traded companies. And no, they don't want that. We're not going to do that. So I'm just I'm just concerned about the politicization of banks. There's a lot of money there and a lot of power that comes along with it. Dennis, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. And also I think that there's, we live in a mixed economy, a mixed economy. You've got the government sector, which is about 20 some odd percent of our economy, and you've got the private sector, which is the other 80%. And the private sector, I think, really should be private. It just shouldn't be so private that it becomes privileged enterprise, to paraphrase Franklin Roosevelt. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Charles in Prescott Valley, Arizona. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Yes, this is pertinent to the discussion that you had a couple of days ago about Trump being a psychopath, a sociopath.
Right.
And you were talking to some Trump defenders on the phone, and I thought that now usually I really appreciate how comprehensive your arguments are, but you were trying to tie this directly to Trump when these folks didn't understand what a psychopath or a sociopath was. And just very quickly, I do understand what they are, but I did read the exact definitions.
The DSM criteria?
Excuse me?
The DSM criteria, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association.
Repeated violations of law, pervasive lying and deception, reckless disregard for safety of others, exaggerated sense of self, on and on. And I think it's good to educate these folks. They thought you in a sense they were just being very defensive about Trump. And I think if you read this all off, you might just end with, does this remind you of somebody?
Yeah. Charles, if you have a link to that you can easily find and tweet to me, would you do it?
Yes, I would. And I was thinking that this is the type of thing you should do a deep dive on to inform your listeners that they might use these points when talking to Trump defenders.
I agree. That's why I'm asking for the link. Charles, thanks a lot for the call. I look forward to reading the whole piece, and your suggestion is well taken. Thank you. Tyler in Columbus, New Jersey. Hey, Tyler, what's up?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I'd like to just ask if you had any advice on convincing peers
to get out and vote?
Well, the simple thing is, so you don't care, who runs your government. You don't care what happens in the future. You don't want to have a say in how your own life is conducted. I would, generally speaking, on a person-to-person level, I would find out what their individual, what's the issue that's most important to them. If they don't like this conditions in the workplace, if they're concerned about, illness, if they're concerned about the environment, I mean, whatever it may be. I would take that one issue and say, oh, so, you don't care if your employer abuses you or whatever.
Yeah, I tried that with a couple of them, and the main theme with all of them seems to be that they actually don't believe that their vote is counted in a way.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of believe that it's already decided and that the vote is just kind of like a show.
Yeah. Well, there are some questions in some states, specifically Georgia, where there is no audit on the voting machines, and the companies that run the voting machines and the state are, kind of deeply in bed with the Republican Party. But even there, I would say, if you don't vote, there's, so maybe your vote is going to be stolen. Maybe somebody's vote is going to be stolen. That just means that we have to turn out more people. I'm guessing these friends of yours, Tyler, are millennials?
Yeah, I'm 24, and they're all within a year of me.
Yeah. That's a tough one. It's like, how do you break through? I still think, looking at these individual issues, getting them involved in the political process somehow. Bernie did an amazing job of activating millennials, getting millennials politically engaged.
And actually, that's what a lot of them actually pointed to, because they were pro-Bernie, but they feel that, like, he got the primary stolen, and I don't know how to tell them that by getting out there and showing that this is what we want and not getting it, that you're maybe more likely to get it later.
Well, no, it's not that. It's that, something terrible happened. The Democratic Party put its thumb on the scales for Hillary Clinton to the detriment of Bernie Sanders. And, that's Donna Brazile wrote a book apologizing for that, and she ran the Democratic Party. You have to acknowledge that. But then going forward, I mean, the DNC is actually cleaning up their act on that. They're saying now that you can't even get in the debates unless you can prove that you've got a large donor base of small donors. This is like, hello, Michael Bloomberg. If you think you can just buy your way into this election, think again. I think that's marvelous. They've done away with superdelegates on the first pass of the voting. I think that's marvelous. They have made changes in response to how badly Bernie got burned, and they realize that people are really PO'd about it and, upset about it. And so, hey, now let's use this, cleaned up tool that we have to move forward and get what we actually want to have happen.
Yeah, those are very good points. Definitely have to bring up.
I don't know how persuasive it is. I don't know how persuasive it is, Tyler. I'm not sure that shaming people works, but certainly appealing to their own self-interest typically is the best way. Maybe some other callers will have other suggestions, hopefully. Tyler, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for watching the program on YouTube there in Columbus, New Jersey. We'll be back. It's 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, home of the political revolution. This is our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 Election and the Transformation of American Politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. "Run, Bobby, Run" is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s, before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program, and Michael in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, good morning, Tom. Happy New Year to you and your family and the crew there.
Thank you. Back at you.
The reason I'm calling, I just wanted to ask you a question, which I know has probably been asked before, but the way I'm looking at it, Trump here and his administration is basically illegitimate. Are there mechanisms, even if they're an anachronistic, law or regulation that's been on the federal books, something in the Constitution, where I honestly feel that Trump is going to resign before the end of this term. He's going to take his chances with the courts out there. I honestly think that. I don't know what's going to happen, but I also feel that when you look at the vice president and holding the leader of the Senate and the former Speaker of the House, all the cabinet members, all the judges, and everything else, to me are illegitimate. He's an illegitimate president. When I, get into conversations with people, I say, do you think that if everything that's going to come out of the special prosecutor's, investigation comes out and shows that this man is a grifter, a crook, and then on top of that, whether he's a willing idiot for the Russians or he was actually talking to them and seeing big ruble or dollar signs, that he was going to go ahead and play the game the way that they were suggesting, it's all illegitimate. None of these people should be in office. None of these people should have, any control of any of our institutions. So what can we say or do to get people to understand that? And one last thing, I'll get off the phone real quick here. To Tyler out there, one of the things that I did this last time around and all with the 2018 elections is I registered millennials to vote. I also took them down to the now governor of Colorado's, election headquarters and showed them what goes on there. Some of these kids were like, wow, and there were kids in there already, and older college graduates and everything else, and old codgers like me, I'm 70, that were in there working. They had no idea of what goes on in a political campaign. Yeah. So I'll get off the phone and listen to, whatever advice you have.
Sure. No, well said, Michael. And that's why, one of my pieces of advice to him was try to get them in the middle of, get them involved with some sort of a political activity.
Yes.
I think the problem that you have identified of illegitimacy, of a president, a man who is in the White House because of crimes being committed that led to his election or selection or whatever the appropriate word is. There is no constitutional remedy for that outside of impeachment, and even impeachment doesn't really remedy the problem. I mean, you still have, then you have the vice president, and Pence is going to keep basically the same kind of policies. I mean, Mitt Romney in his op-ed in the New York Times or the Washington Post day before yesterday, in which he attacked Donald Trump's character, said, there's an entire paragraph in there where he says, we like the tax cuts, we like the deregulation, we like more polluted air and things and greater profits for corporations. That's what Republicans do. We just don't like the way Donald Trump is doing it. And unfortunately, I think right now the main remedy is cleaning up our electoral system, which is what H.R. 1 does a huge step toward, the first piece of legislation that came out of the House today. And secondly, educating everybody as to the illegitimacy of this president, and that's a process that's ongoing. It's got a lot of work to it, but hopefully the American people are so horrified, or the vast majority of the American people are so horrified by what's going on in the White House right now, and in the cabinet. Frankly, I think what's going on in the cabinet is even worse than what's going on in the White House. that they will not make these mistakes again. Michael, unfortunately, we don't have a legitimacy test. I'm not even sure that I think there's a few states that have, mechanisms in their constitutions for contesting elections. To the best of my knowledge, there's no, outside of the individual states, there's no such federal mechanism. So we're stuck with them. Michael, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. George in Crystal Lake, Illinois. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I understand this isn't a Trump cabinet meeting, but I really need to commend you on your coverage this week of Elizabeth Warren and the misogyny in our culture. It was really good. So you spoke earlier of the complicity of the corporate media, and this is kind of just maybe a reminder of the uphill battle that we have here. It's not just CNN, Fox, and MSNBC that's complicit. It's also the corporate-owned Spanish media, such as Univision, Telemundo, things like that. I want to tell you a quick little story. Back in 2015, my mom, during the Democratic primary, my mom always asks me who I'm voting for, but this time she comes up and says, "Hey, make sure you vote for Hillary." And I said, "Well, I'm not, voting for Hillary. I'm going to be voting for Bernie Sanders." And she says, "The crazy old guy?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "Yeah, the crazy old guy." And I'm like, kind of get into it a little bit more, and come to find out that that's, Hillary's being portrayed one way, and Bernie Sanders is being portrayed a totally different way.
Is she a consumer of Spanish language media?
Yes, yeah. So she watches Telemundo and Univision, to get her news.
Right.
I was in shock. I couldn't understand. I was blown away by it because I had explained to her that no, he's not a crazy. I started explaining his ideas, and she thought that wow, what? Maybe I think she still voted for Hillary because that's who she was told to vote for. But it's really, I think it's a really big problem, and I'm concerned actually that the same thing might happen again this time. So I've started already making letting my mom know about some of the other candidates. Not
good.
Good.
Yeah, media has tremendous power, and this is something that unfortunately the Democrats have been slow to figure out. You've got Rupert Murdoch, funding. He owns more than half of the print media in Australia. He owns a good chunk of the media in the UK, and of course, the Fox, the Fox empire, and Wall Street Journal and New York Post here in the United States, and he wields those to the political advantage of his friends and to the detriment of his enemies. And this has been going on for a long time, but it's as corporate concentration increases, the number of voices and the number of messages and the complexity of the messages decreases. And this is, classic destruction of an ecosystem, in this case, a media ecosystem. And it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing for democracy, generally, broadly, and it's certainly not a good thing for the country.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I would, just say that, my mom was open to, what I was telling her, just kind of, let's say Bernie's platform. And I think that there's a lot of, Latinos out there that are open. They're just not informed, obviously.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just encourage, everyone to, just be vocal to, just talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends, talk to, especially if they're, Spanish-speaking people that, might not. I guess a lot of people in our culture are just basically tuned into one show, I suppose.
Yeah. And the extent to which the media has been monopolized in the Spanish language field is even greater than it is in the English language field. But the other thing to keep in mind, though, George, is that during the first almost year of the primary, after Bernie had announced his candidacy, while he was pulling 10 and 20,000 people at a pop into stadiums, it was a complete blackout on coverage of him. ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, all of them were completely ignoring him. So, if she was a consumer of regular media up to a certain point, up to where he kind of broke through a little bit, and I think that was after the first debate, up until that point, she might have said the same thing if she was just consuming, any of those 5 networks, or 6 or 7 networks, I guess. 6 networks. So, it's a tough one. It's a tough one. George, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. And thank you for the insight into what's going on in Spanish media. Les in Puyallup, Washington. Hey, Les, what's up? Puyallup.
Hi. Puyallup, Washington.
Puyallup, thank you.
I've talked to you a couple of times, and I wanted to touch on misogyny, which you were talking about yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to leave to the food bank, so I didn't get a chance to call. Now, everybody kept hitting Hillary about Benghazi, but nobody ever said anything about Bush and 9/11.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a perfect example. But I wanted to touch on something more personal. My mother and my father were in a relationship where my father was the controlling master and controlled with iron fist and beat us regularly because his father did too. Okay, so and I feel like she was weak in the respect that she allowed that to happen. And the misogyny of that is that women have been beat into this submission for so long that the misogyny continues in that respect.
Yeah, I mentioned that yesterday. Oppressed people very frequently internalize the messages of their oppressors.
Yeah, and so when my father died, I thought, oh, great, now she's going to be back to being a Democrat. No, she went to voting for Trump. And I got so irritated. I go, why did she do that? Well, she's living with my brother-in-law and my sister. And Republican crazy bastard.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that. Les, thanks a lot for the call. This is a challenge so many of us have here. It's how do you deal with family? It's a tough one. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Luke Vargas with Talk Media News will be with us in about 4 minutes here, checking and find out what's going on in the world. And then we continue rolling along with Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Denise in Chicago. Hey, Denise, thanks for listening to iTunes. What's up?
Oh, hey, Tom. Thanks so much for your call. Your comments about Elizabeth Warren just have been resonating with me. In fact, I saw a tweet on, I think it was December 31st, where Scott, what's his name? I forget people's names that I don't care for. Scott Walker, who came out and really went after Warren, calling her a liberal, out-of-touch professor who thinks government is the answer to our problems. And you just said something that caught kind of what happens to me sometimes, is that you exhibit the behavior of your oppressors. And not that I really believe that, but it puts a question in your mind, well, what is wrong with Warren? Because actually, when I first saw her or listened to her, I really didn't know if she had the fire, if she really had that presidential thing, that thing, that people have. And then after just seeing her a couple times in action, I was just blown away by her.
Yeah.
I was just like, whoa, this woman is she's the real deal. And the only other comment I wanted to make, and just, I don't know if you want to expand on it or add to the, Scott Walker, who never had a job in the private sector but off government paychecks, which is really kind of adding to his ugliness, I guess. But,
and his hypocrisy.
Yeah, that's the right word. Now I forgot my last point. Oh, Elizabeth Warren is just her own person, and trying to compare her to Hillary or Kamala Harris, you just can't, and that's what I'm afraid is happening. Every time I hear Warren or something else, or even, and this is not off the subject, but another example, Michelle Obama, finally beat, Hillary Clinton. There's always this I don't know, this spin about women competing, one is better than the other. So that's all I've just been noticing, and just thought, I just love what you've been saying about her, because she's the bomb, so to speak. So thank you.
You're welcome. The conundrum that the media face is if you are committed to not actually discussing the issues. And as I said earlier, a tip of the hat to Rachel Maddow and also to Ali Velshi, who actually will talk about the issues. But broadly speaking, most of the other programming on all of the networks, this isn't to pick on any one network, on all of the networks is issue-free. So if you're going to have issue-free coverage of Elizabeth Warren, if you're not going to talk about what she did with the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, if you're not going to talk about how she took on the banksters, if you're not going to talk about what she thinks about taxes on rich people and big corporations like the media companies, if you're not going to talk about any of that, what do you have to talk about? She's a woman. And so, and if you're not going to talk about issues relative to Hillary Clinton, what do you have to talk about? She's a woman. And so then you start, comparing at that level, which is the most superficial and stupid, frankly, level for an analysis or comparison. But that's all they can do, Denise.
Father, I think she was saying that. I think he was a janitor. So if they're going to compare Hillary to Elizabeth, those are two completely different upbringings. So
well, I think Hillary came from a middle class family too, didn't she?
Yeah, but I think her education, and her drive from her father was different. But I love the way you articulated it. You're spot on. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Denise. Good talking with you. We'll be back. Luke Vargas is going to be with us in just a moment from Talk Media News. We'll find out what's going on in the world. Stick around. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, joining us from the UN headquarters in New York, Luke Vargas. You can hear Luke break down foreign policy stories 2 minutes each day. Search for Luke Vargas or Talk Media News wherever you get your podcasts. Luke, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too. So the U.S. trade envoys are meeting with the Chinese officials in Beijing next Monday. What's the agenda? What's the story here?
Well, here's something to consider. You remember back at the G20 meetings, this is very early December last year in Argentina, you had President Trump and Xi Jinping sit down for dinner, and they agreed to a 3-month sort of pause on the ratcheting up of tariffs.
Right, which were supposed to increase the first week of December, weren't they?
I think it might have been January, actually, and now they've been pushed out to March 2nd, if I have my timelines correct.
Got it.
But we have until the very beginning of March to figure out some sort of workable fix to this trade war, or else it looks like the tariffs are back on and would be back on in a big way. So that's, December 1st. Till now, we haven't had a single meeting between U.S. and Chinese trade officials. It's like everyone's just waiting out the clock here. So we're finally going to get a first crack at this on Monday. It's kind of interesting to look at the U.S. trade delegation. It's being led by the deputy U.S. trade representative, Jeff Garish, which is important because there had, one thing that I had been telling you to look out for, that experts have been telling me was really important is, is this going to continue to be on the Trump side just a whole big room full of disagreeing voices who all have competing trade agendas, and that had been a big problem for the trade talks through much of last year. You had the Commerce Department, you had Treasury in there, and then just sort of people from the White House team that were sort of bringing in their own demands. And Trump said at the G20 meeting, look, Bob Lighthizer, the U.S. trade representative, is going to take the lead on this. And I think that's pretty important because, and even though Lighthizer won't be there, his deputy will be, the U.S. Trade Representative's office has been focused on a very different set of bigger structural demands as it pertains to China. You've seen the Commerce Department and Treasury, particularly Commerce, been sort of satisfied in the past when China tries to dig its way out of the trade war by saying, hey, we're going to buy more soybeans or more rice or something like that. I mean, and particularly the White House likes that. That's the kind of thing that people in the Oval Office think is pretty easy to sell to President Trump to say, hey, we're narrowing the trade deficit. But the U.S. Trade Representative's office is really focused on intellectual property theft, forced technology transfer. And so I think it speaks to the sort of seriousness with which the Trump team, at least on this issue, and at least for now, and of course that could change, is coming to the table and saying, look, we expect more from them. And you really haven't seen much from the Chinese side since the G20. They talked about maybe we'll pass a law in the Chinese parliament that will, prohibit the forced transfer of foreign, technology. Maybe we will start treating, foreign firms and domestic firms equally, all these other things. But the U.S. hasn't even responded to any of those proposals, which suggests we don't think they're adequate. So it's curious that the U.S. trade representatives are meaningful, that they're leading this. And let's watch what happens. I think there was a sort of a moment a few days ago where President Trump asked about this, said, look, we're not too worried. The stock market issues in December, I think, what did he say there? It's just a little bit of a jitters or a glitch, I think is what he called it. Right. And then you had Apple come out yesterday and say, oh, no, our guidance for sales is going down. And I think sort of panic began to set in. So I'm intrigued to see how this all works out on Monday, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot about whether this 2 months that's remaining before the major tariffs come into effect is a realistic amount of time to hash all of this out. My money is probably on no, and that if any progress is seen, then maybe the parties will ask for even more of an extension. There's just still so much to work through, and I think that deadline is pretty unrealistic.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to keep track of. Meanwhile, in Saudi Arabia, they're trying to put lipstick on that pig. It's got to be a somewhat less sexist metaphor. But anyhow, you get my point. I mean, or animalist, but they're trying to kind of clean it up. Yeah, we murdered this guy, and now we're going to kill the guys who murdered him. Really?
Exactly right. So originally, the Saudis said they arrested 18 people in connection with Jamal Khashoggi's murder. It's always hard to put those two words together. And 11 people were charged yesterday. We're learning now that 5 of them are going to be sentenced to death. We don't even know exactly which individuals. This whole thing has been carried out in a pretty non-transparent way, which surprises absolutely no one who was, counting on sort of what we would consider a trial that meets international standards. I think what's very interesting here is you continue to see, though, the kind of countries that could escalate this and maybe try and get a better trial or force, let's say, the UN to get involved, just deciding to sit this out. The UN keeps saying the trial that's being done in Saudi Arabia is not sufficient. It doesn't meet international standards. It's not transparent, and that an international investigation is necessary. And yet, when journalists like myself push the UN and say, hey, well, why don't you guys just open that up? You do have the power to do so. The UN keeps coming back and saying, well, we need a country that's involved in this case to refer it to us.
In other words, the United States.
It could be
or
the
Turkey.
Saudis. It could be Turkey. It could be the United States. Clearly, no one's expecting the Saudis to do that. And the U.S., I think we all understand, Trump and his team don't seem eager to want this to be pulled even more into the open. And then the Turks, as we've seen repeatedly, seem to prefer to be dealing with this Khashoggi case in terms of sort of how to put pressure on the U.S., how to put pressure on Saudi Arabia. And, of course, Turkey is frequently criticized by the UN. I think they would have some misgivings about, letting them take over and probably, in the course of an independent investigation, pull up quite a bit of problems about even how the Turks have handled this whole thing. So for now, everyone's sort of blaming each other, and I think it's pretty easy to criticize the way the Saudis have handled this whole thing. But are we going to get anything better? It looks pretty unlikely.
Yeah. So Saudi Arabia is going to have an execution, and then they'll have an announcement, and they'll say that's it, and dust their hands. Do you think that the rest of the world is going to say, okay, fine?
I mean, the executions for absurd things happen all the time in Saudi Arabia, and we say, hey, well, that's too bad, but it's pretty hard to get them to change their ways. So I would expect, unfortunately, that might be the outcome.
We still need their oil.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom. Take care.
Thank you. And you can follow Luke on Twitter at The Courier. We'll be back with more of Anything Goes Friday right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Now, here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program. Our book today is Warrior Is by Harley Zephyr and Robin Zephyr. It's an absolutely brilliant book about Native Americans and Native American history. This is from page 428 in the chapter Approach. Sitting Bull was one of the most recognizable and yet disliked Lakota leaders according to the U.S. military and the white society as a whole. This was the case thanks to the heavily promoted misinformation about and fear of and general prejudice against the Lakota and Indian people in general. The non-treating signing Lakota, of whom Sitting Bull was one, had been unfairly portrayed as hostiles. Also, the whites feared Sitting Bull because he was the manifestation of the hostiles as stereotyped in the U.S. media, especially in the media of the Midwestern section of the Great Plains at the time, such as the Bismarck Tribune. The dislike of Sitting Bull and his Lakota followers, and of all bands of Lakota, was perpetuated by the U.S. military's portrayal of the Hunkpapa Lakota leader as well. Sitting Bull, ever since the early 1850s, the beginning of the encroachment, of the whites onto the Lakota's Aboriginal homelands, was a vocal and easily recognized proponent of preserving the Lakota's traditional way of life, the free, sovereign, nomadic lifestyle that the Lakota were meant to live. The Hunkpapa leader was a gifted leader with a spiritual aura about him that allowed him to communicate with all beings through the natural energy of the spirit world. Sitting Bull was very outspoken, was often quoted when speaking about how he viewed the natural world and the clash of cultures. Here are some of his famous quotations. "What white man can ever say I stole his land or a penny of his money, yet they say I'm a thief? If we must die, we die defending our rights. What treaty that the whites have kept has the red man broken? Not one. Strangely enough, they have a mind to till the soil, and the love of possessions is a disease in them. The earth has received the embrace of the sun, and we shall see the results of that love. Each man is good in his sight. It is not necessary for eagles to be crows. Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children. It is through this mysterious power that we too have our being, and we therefore yield to our neighbors, even to our animal neighbors, the same rights as we ourselves have to inhabit this vast land." End of quotes. Because of his prominent position among his own people and among the Lakota in general, Sitting Bull was a force. When he chose to align with the young Ninkoju warrior by the name of Spirit Horse, the two men made a formidable pair. Sitting Bull with his spiritual and charismatic leadership abilities, and Spirit Horse with his finely honed experience in military tactics, protocol planning, and strategy, a great source of battle knowledge and unlimited courage and fearlessness. Sitting Bull, however, would continue his efforts to seek peace and diplomacy with the United States and its military leaders, especially Custer, Grant, Sheridan, Terry, and Crook. The U.S. military, and especially the Dakota Territory military leadership, all at once feared and admired and disdained the two Lakota leaders. The United States feared them for their notorious nature, their popularity among the Lakota people, and their innate ability to continue to frustrate the general policies of the U.S. government. The United States and its officials were trying to tame and soothe the Indians to lure them into signing away all their land holdings and rights by agreeing to the so-called treaties. Many other Lakota headmen agreed to sign these treaties. Many Lakota believed that to be something that would lead to the future detriment of the Lakota. Terry, Sheridan, Grant, Sherman, and Custer all had personal feelings about the Lakota and about men like Sitting Bull. In the 1860s, through the time period of the lead up to the Powder River Campaign of 1876, the U.S. military became committed to removing, eliminating, annihilating, and destroying all of the Lakota, but especially Sitting Bull. Sheridan would be heard saying to Terry, "The only good Indian I ever saw were dead," or stating that the U.S. will break him, Sitting Bull and his people, using the metaphor of a controlling owner breaking his horse, taming it so it could be ridden, or indicating how the controlling master breaks a slave, not to rebel or resist, leading the slave to merely submit and give in to the master's will. A big part of the reason why the U.S. military's hatred toward Sitting Bull and the Lakota intensified was the issue of the gold in the Hisapa. The desire to obtain that gold rose to prominence in the minds of the greedy government officials and private business ventures. The financial and mining interests were foaming at the mouth, wanting to get their hands on the Black Hills. No matter the desires, feelings, rights, or very lives of the Lakota, the United States was determined to possess the Black Hills at any cost, whether in effort, in money, or lost lives, or in lost honor and humanity. It became an obsession for many in private business and in the U.S. government and military. And that obsession spread like a dark poisonous snake had bitten them all, and had spread the vile poison of greed, vanity, covetousness, death, and destruction. Having become overbearing, it soaked into the souls, minds, spirits, and what was left of the hearts of the men calling the shots. Ironically, even Custer acknowledged how the Indians likely felt about the encroachment of the whites, saying, quote, "If I were an Indian, I would greatly prefer to cast my lot among those of my people who adhere to the free open plains, rather than submit to the confined limits of a reservation." This warrior is.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday. There's a little bit of stuff in the news here. Representative Rashida Tlaib, the newly sworn in, I think she's the first Palestinian member of the U.S. House of Representatives from the Detroit area, in a private event last night, said that we're going to go in there and impeach the MFer. Only she said the word. And so immediately, all the Republicans are clutching their pearls. Oh my God. You'll recall Dick Cheney told Pat Leahy, "Go F yourself," on the floor of the Senate, right in front of all of us. But apparently his daughter, Liz, "Oh, this is foul language." Right. Kevin McCarthy. This is, this is incredible. He goes, this terrible thing, and one of the reporters says, "Well, the president not too long ago referred to a woman as horse face. Who within your caucus called for the president to stop using that kind of language?" And McCarthy is like, "Well, I think a lot of them did." Right. And grab him by the, and yeah. I mean, somebody asked Nancy Pelosi about this, and she says, "I don't like that language. I'm not going to use that language, but I don't establish language standards for my colleagues, and I don't think it's anything worse than the president has said." Amen. Meanwhile, somebody called earlier in the program, and thank you to the person who tweeted this stuff to me, about a 10-year freeze on importing drugs into the United States. Turns out that, that's part of the new NAFTA deal that Trump negotiated, 10 years of blocking you or me from buying drugs for half the price from Canada. And by the way, and Trump says that the reason he's doing this, he says, we want our drugs to be made here. When you talk prescription drugs, we don't like getting them from foreign countries. We don't know what's happening with those drugs, how they're being made. Right. Except that this is according to the National Institutes of Health, NIH, and this was also tweeted to me. This is from the CMAG-JMAC. NIH.gov website. 76% of the pharmaceuticals sold in Canada are imported from, principally China and India, and some from Puerto Rico, although I think that's way, way down now. And so presumably in the United States, the numbers are the same. It's roughly 80% of all our drugs come from someplace else. But, we've got to protect the profits of these manufacturers. And they're not even, in many cases, manufacturers. They're buying them from factories in India and China that are actually owned by other companies. And, but they're buying these pharmaceuticals for a penny a pill, and they're selling them here for $1 a pill. I mean, it's just, as long as they can get away with it, they will continue to do it. So all that said, it's Friday. It's Anything Goes Friday. Sasha in Kent, Washington. Hey, Sasha, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I have, in free moments, been toying with my ideas for a new constitution. Would that Never Never Land be possible? And one of the things in it is, if you shut down the government, you voted for it, you don't get paid. And you don't get your $1,000 a month car allowance. You don't get your franking privilege. You don't get your health insurance, nothing. When you start the government back up again, you don't get that money back. Now, I grant you, most of them, the evil ones, they've got lots of other income, but it makes a point anyway.
Yeah. No, I think so. And some of that can be done by legislation, Sasha, but most of it, right now needs to be happening at the ballot box. So,
right. And that's where we are wearing out our shoes.
There you go. Amen. Sasha, thanks so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Thank you for listening to KBCS. Louise just handed me this. Chuck Schumer just came out of a meeting with Donald Trump at the White House, and he said that Trump had threatened to keep the government closed for, quote, months or even years until he gets his little wall. He said that the meeting was lengthy and sometimes contentious. This is what Nancy Pelosi said. It was a lengthy and sometimes contentious conversation with the president. Both sides agreed to continue talks, but Pelosi said, we can't resolve this until we open up the government. And Schumer says it's very hard to see how progress will be made unless they open up the government. And Trump is like, hey, I got my hostages, 800,000 people here. I've got the gun of bankruptcy right to their heads. And you Democrats better start dancing, or I'm going to shoot the hostages. It's really interesting. It's turning into like this, world-class level game of chicken. And Trump is doing his little rant right now, and Mike Pence is standing behind him just with looking like he just, like he's got the world's worst hangnail or something. I mean, he looks like he's in pain. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind?
Happy New Year, Tom.
Thanks. Back at you.
I've tried to get through to you a couple other times, and I haven't been able to. But so there's a lot that I'd like to get through. But to stay on point today, Elizabeth Warren, she's in Western Iowa making speeches, and so she's going to hit the ground running. And I'll support her if she's the nominee, and I'll donate as it goes. But,
yeah, me too, in a heartbeat. I mean, there's some great candidates, and like I said, I've been focusing on her because she just basically announced that she's running. Jay Inslee next week. We're going to try and talk about him some more. But there's some really good candidates here, and every time I hear about how some of these old fossils in the Democratic Party think that Joe Biden should be the nominee, I just shudder. That will kill us.
I'm not good there either. I don't see the upside. I love him as a man and love him as speaking off the cuff and his humanity.
But see, if Dianne Feinstein is out saying, wow, yeah, it should be Joe Biden, but if he becomes the nominee, the first thing people are going to talk about is how badly he treated Anita Hill at that hearing, when Clarence Thomas, when he was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And then the second thing they're going to talk about is, he was the principal author of the bankruptcy bill in 2005. And just aggressively said young people should not be able to file bankruptcy on student loans. It encourages them to be irresponsible. And this is stuff you can't make go away.
Yep. So something I'd like to touch on, the misogyny and everything. It's all about options. And the tribalism that exists in our society, like in my district, it went 7%, and we had a good Democratic candidate for Congress against King. 70% went with King, and it's depressing. But it's with the tribalism and everything else that's in politics. I think to get her speaking manner down, her project power and definition with her voice. in her speech. You still there?
Yeah, I am. Your phone is breaking up, though, Randy, so let's try to make this tight.
Could I pivot and touch on a speech from the past of John F. Kennedy's that is really relevant today? And I don't know if you could find a cut or in there that you would like. He was speaking to the newspaper people. I can't remember the name of the organization. It was the Secret Society speech that was done on April 26th.
Yeah, that was the National Association of Newspaper Editors or Publishers or whatever. Yeah, he said America does not like secret societies. We're not a nation that. Yeah, I remember that.
Yep. Before Twitter, that's what a president sounded like, and the dumbing down of America isn't. And Trump is.
Yeah. No, the dumbing down of America is in full bloom right now, Randy. It really is. And, there are some lights in our media, but there's an awful lot of just, fluff out there that is actually, I think, coarsening and damaging our political dialogues. Randy, thanks for the call. And Happy New Year. It's coming up on 15 minutes, 14 and a half minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. The place where despair is not an option. Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Anything Goes Friday. What do you want to talk about? We'll be right back. And welcome back. Mark, watching Free Speech TV in Bellevue, Michigan. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Happy New Year from near Lansing, Michigan.
Yeah, I've been to Bellevue. How are you?
Oh, just fine. Yeah, you must have driven through it on the way to Battle Creek or something.
On more than one occasion.
Yeah. Okay, I got a question about the Fed and how it might act during a financial collapse.
Mm-hmm.
I think there will be another financial collapse. That's likely not very controversial. But what I fear is that the Fed's just going to revert to form, bail out the financial industry.
Yeah.
Forget about everyone else.
Yep. Well, that's pretty much all the Fed can do. If you want to do what FDR did and bail out individual homeowners, that requires legislation.
Okay, but I got a question about it because I found something in the Federal Reserve Act, that might be useful anyhow. So what I would like, let me just say what I would like it to do. I would like it to just allow the financial industry just to fail and completely be liquidated.
Right.
Let the market work its magic.
Yeah, that's what happened in 1933.
Yeah. And so then, that would be just punishment for their crimes. That would be one thing. And also, it would deflate the financial industry. It's way too big, has way too much money, so this would kind of drain most of it away.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my understanding of the problem is, though, that if you do that, the money markets will freeze up.
Yep.
And since we have just-in-time financing, even for productive industries, that means all, mom-and-pop productive industries, or not all of them, but a lot of them would also just kind of go bust because they don't have operating expenses.
Yep.
So what I would like to do, you can tell me, the feasibility, is there is a part of the Federal Reserve Act, Section 13, Paragraph 3, and what it allows the Fed to do is, as they put it, to provide funds directly to individuals, partnerships, and corporations under extreme circumstances.
Well, that's what the Fed did in 2008 and 2009. Out of that $29 trillion that they were passing out, several trillion of it actually just went to billionaires.
Well, I guess the thing is you got to have the right people, though.
Right.
Well, my question is, okay, so could the Fed be repurposed to, just allow the financial system to collapse, number one, but number two, to provide funds to money markets to keep the productive industries functioning?
I don't know why not.
I'm getting at?
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
There might be that might require some legislation to set that up because, for example, right now the only way that the Fed can buy or sell treasuries, for example, is through a commercial bank. The law requires all those transactions to go through commercial banks. So the guys in New York City get a slice of the profit while the Fed is just trying to move things on and off its balance sheet and trying to set interest rates and all that kind of stuff. Then, no matter what the Fed does, the big banks make a profit. Now, the big banks, of course, own the Fed. So it's like that shouldn't be all that surprising. But that's the way it's set up. So there may be similar things that would, prevent them from directly intervening in currency markets. But I think doing what FDR did and just bailing out people at the very bottom, he bought hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of mortgages, these 5-year exploding mortgages that people had in the 1930s, and turned them into 30-year notes that were government, funded notes, and those only expired in the 1960s. I mean, it's just and it saved millions of people's homes. Injecting money at the bottom is the way to do it. But Mark, that's an interesting question. I'm sorry, I don't know the details of the answer. But thanks for the call. Welcome back. 19 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann with you. Dave in Lockport, Illinois. Hey, Dave, thanks for listening to Chicago's Progressive Talk. What's up?
Well, I had an idea. I was listening to Bill Press this morning, and he had someone about I think it was the DNC, saying they were going to have about 12 debates for the primary on the president's side, and they were looking for media. Now, last time we had presidential media, or I guess what I'm trying to get at is I think they should maybe try to get some of those on Fox News. I hate giving them good programming. I'm sure they won't consider it good programming, but it might be a way to break through that wall that sometimes these Fox viewers have in getting the Democratic message to them.
I absolutely agree. The one time in every election cycle, every 4 years, the one time when the networks actually are forced to carry a discussion of actual issues is when they carry the debates. They, of course, immediately after the debates revert back to form, back to horse race, back to, who won, who lost, who put their foot in their mouth, and who really zinged somebody else. And once again, we're not going to talk about issues. But the candidates themselves talk about the issues, and that, as you say, Dave, I forget the phrase you used, but that kind of, what was the phrase George W. Bush used? Catapult the propaganda. It shoots it over the top of the media right into the homes of the individual people watching. And on Fox News, that would be a revelation, I would think.
Yeah, and I don't think they actually had the Democrat-only debates when 2 years ago, 2 years ago. I was trying to find out who carried those debates last, and it didn't look like they sponsored or had any of it. Just the Democratic candidates on. They only had GOP versus Democrat.
Fox only carried the Republican Republican primaries?
Yeah,
not the Democratic primaries.
Not the Democratic primaries. They carried the actual presidential debates, but not the Democratic primary.
Yeah, that does not surprise me, but it saddens me, or something like that. It's unfortunate.
I just think it'd be a great way for us to break through, because they have a stranglehold on their viewership, and the viewership is just misinformed on a lot of things.
I absolutely agree. And note to self: next time Tom Perez is on the show, encourage him to get at least one of the Democratic debates on Fox News. I'm with you.
Yeah, sounds like they're still looking for media partners to carry, and that they have a lot of debates that they're planning on doing, and starting in June or something of this year.
Yep.
So they have a lot to dish out. Hopefully they can get a couple on there.
Yeah, amen. Dave, thanks a lot for the call. Brent, in Hilliard, Ohio. Hey, Brent, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I heard about some of the gentleman called and was saying that he knew some folks who were disappointed and couldn't vote and all of that, and there certainly was some of that in 2016. And I just want to encourage those folks that if you are listening, it's super important. And even if your person doesn't win and you're left with two choices and you don't particularly care for either, there are still differences and there are still reasons to matter. But I would suspect that most of your audience did vote. So if the audience that listens to you knows those folks, especially if they're young, get educated on the issues, okay?
Yeah.
Call your congressman. Write your senators. Know who these people are. And if they're not standing up for what you believe in and you're young, please throw your hat in the ring.
Yeah.
Every one of these states, and counties have, Democratic Party affiliates, and get in touch with those people.
And there's inevitably positions
involved.
open, too. But, I think one of the best ways to sell this, Brent, I've been thinking about it ever since that caller last hour, the 24-year-old guy who said, how do I convince my friends to vote? That the idea, this is probably an old-fashioned idea, but, I think it's one that could be sold if you put the right frame around it, of essentially civic responsibility. And the way I'd frame it is I'd say, if you were walking down the street and you saw some drunk driver coming down the street and hit somebody and knocked him down, maybe even killed him, and then drove off, and you got the license plate number, wouldn't you feel an obligation to report that? I mean, isn't that just like the minimal civic duty? Well, right now you've got, the car of state is being driven by a bunch of drunk drivers. And, and we have an obligation to notice what's going on and to say something about it, to do something about it. And the way that we do that is by voting. What do you think?
That's absolutely correct. I was a local union president, and I was middle-aged and married with 2 kids, and it is a lot if you have that. But if you are young and you don't have a lot of outside obligations, please get involved. I know it can be disheartening, but I want you to know that we can overcome if we get the young people involved. So we're pulling for you, and you got some votes from some of us in labor.
Amen. Amen. Brent, thanks a lot for the call. Very, very, very well said. Wayne in Pompano Beach, Florida. Hey, Wayne, what's up? Wayne, listening on Sirius XM? Wayne, I'm going to put you on hold. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up? Louise Wayne is on line 7, by the way. I'm sorry?
Hey, Tom?
Yeah.
No, are you there? Hey, I want to ask you this question about, Trump being persuaded by the Republicans to either resign or be impeached, because I see that's coming up more and more in commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And there was like Elizabeth Drew, I think her name is. She actually did a very comprehensive paper or op-ed on it about how impeachment is really inevitable at this point, and it's going to be led by the Republicans.
Yeah, I read it.
All right, again. Now, but my analysis is a little bit different. Trump, as we all know, makes really erratic comments. Like for instance, the other day he said that he didn't that the Russians invaded Afghanistan in 1979 to stop terrorism.
Right.
But then he goes back and forth, and sometimes he makes rather insightful comments as well. Now, I think the insightful commentary is coming from like Stephen K. Miller, maybe even Bannon still. Even though Bannon's out, I think he's still advising Trump.
Oh, sure.
But my question is pretty simple. Do you think, all right, given the state of the world right now and how we're doing cut and run in a lot of countries, and, like in Venezuela there's issues, in Taiwan there's issues, instead of resigning, Trump will do something really, really confrontational to incite maybe.
I believe that to be the case.
I
think if he's backed into a corner, he's going to do something like Reagan's invasion of Grenada. He's going to try and come up with a low-risk conflict that will draw everybody's attention away from what's going on. The problem is I don't think there's any low-risk conflicts left in the world right now, given how polarized everything is. And this guy, I mean, trusting Donald Trump not to make a misstep on the international stage is like thinking you can run through a minefield and not unscathed. I mean, it's crazy. Dave, spot on. I think you're right.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with your calls on your media support group for We the People. Right here. Stick around. Today we're reading from the Constitution Today by Akil Reed Amar. This is from it's a collection of essays. This is from his essays on the judiciary. This was originally published on Find Law in 2002. It's titled More on Unfree Speech. The Supreme Court prohibits network television cameras and radio microphones from its public oral arguments. Transcripts of the back and forth between attorneys and the justices are not posted on the court's website, until weeks have passed and the public's interest has waned. Members of the public may not even take notes in the gallery about what is being said in open court. Meanwhile, in its opinions, the court trumpets the importance of free speech and a free press. On the topic of free expression, why doesn't the Supreme Court practice what it preaches? That was the question Steve Calabrese and I recently posed in an op-ed in the New York Times, marking the opening of the Supreme Court's term earlier this month. Here I'll expand on the court's reluctance to welcome the First Amendment into its own courtroom. The First Amendment is the darling of the current court. Though sharply divided on many other issues, justices across the spectrum agree that free expression rights should be construed broadly. But the court's love affair with that First Amendment is a relatively modern development. Less than a decade after the adoption of the Bill of Rights, circuit-riding justices enthusiastically enforced a 1798 sedition law that made it a federal offense to criticize the president. Early in the 20th century, the court upheld punishment of a newspaper publisher for editorializing against state judges. During World War I, the justices sent Eugene Debs, a notable presidential candidate, to prison for peacefully criticizing the government. Indeed, before 1925, the court had never, not once, used free expression principles to invalidate government censorship, even as it routinely construed property rights broadly to invalidate economic regulation. Today's justices have repudiated this regressive legacy, but the residue of the early court's indifference to free expression remains visible in the court building itself, as the aforementioned rules and practices indicate. Perhaps these court rules and practices do not literally abridge freedom of speech or of the press, but if not, they sure come close. After all, the apparent purpose of these rules is precisely to limit free expression and free thought. Consider the rule against note-taking. A person in the courtroom can clean his wallet, or twiddle his thumbs, or tug his earlobe, or engage in countless other mindless activities, but is prohibited from engaging in the cognitive and expressive activity of writing down what he hears the justices saying, along with his own comments or questions or criticisms. Consider also the rule against the media's cameras. The court's rules do not bar security cameras in the courtroom, and such cameras may well be in the room for all we know. What the justices are banning is thus not cameras per se, but network television cameras, cameras that might broadcast information about the court to the American public. The harms that these rules seek to prevent are harms that pivot on the acts of thought and expression themselves. And these are the very sorts of harms the government typically may not seek to prevent under the Supreme Court's standard First Amendment case law. To put the point another way, no Supreme Court rule bars carrying a pencil into the courtroom or wearing a chopstick in one's hairdo. The ban is not based on security concerns, but is rather directly aimed at expressive activity per se, using one's pencil to take notes. More generally, one of the core purposes of the First Amendment is to protect a robust and timely public discourse about government officials and government decision-making, including, of course, judicial officials and judicial officials' decisions. But that discourse is precisely what is dampened by the court's own rule about its own building. This is especially so because the day of oral argument is one of the 2 days, the other being when the final Supreme Court decision is announced, that the American public and the American media are most likely to focus on a given legal case. If discourse that day is dampened, the public has lost a unique and irreplaceable occasion for democratic discussion and deliberation. When it comes to other government arenas, post offices, airports, school grounds, and so on, the court has typically insisted that such forums allow as much speech as is functionally compatible with the basic purpose of the arena. Yet in its own building, the court represses expressive activity without any strong showing of incompatibility or disruption. There is a word for this, and it is spelled hypocrisy, hypocrisy. The court's transcript policies are also unfree in another sense. In the days after oral argument, the transcripts are anything but free. The court gives a temporary monopoly to a private company, which in turn charges high fees for transcripts. The court would never, nowadays at least, give a private company a monopoly over its written opinions. Why should its oral arguments be treated any differently? There's nothing secret or confidential about oral arguments. Unlike judicial conferences where justices deliberate privately among themselves, oral arguments take place in open court. They are public events conducted by public servants with public money. The public deserves full access. To recast the point in the language of federalism, Americans outside the Beltway deserve electronic access comparable to the ability of those who live in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland to attend arguments in person. If television cameras are not acceptable, at a minimum, the arguments should be carried live on public radio, as happened in December 2000 for Bush v. Gore, and transcripts should be freely available immediately. The book is The Constitution Today by Akil Reed Amar.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Joan McCarter is, let me make sure that's, Joan McCarter on the Daily Kos staff. She and Mark Sumner are just absolutely brilliant writers, and they produce so much great content for Daily Kos. She says there's a nice little silver lining for Vice President Mike Pence, the cabinet, and senior administration officials in the government shutdown. While 800,000 federal employees and thousands of people working for the government under contract are going without paychecks, administration folks are getting $10,000 raises. And this is the cabinet secretaries, all the cabinet's members, the deputy secretaries, the administrators, like the EPA administrator. They're getting $10,000. Why? Because, well, here it is. She said, former Speaker of the House Paul Ryan refused to bring the funding bills for the multiple agencies to the floor, including a pay freeze first enacted in 2013 and renewed every year. When those bills died, so did the pay freeze. So not only do these guys get raises, they get 5 years worth of raises starting with next week's paycheck. And it's because Trump shut the government down. I mean, it doesn't get more bizarre than that. I mean, that's just breathtaking. Lawrence in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Lawrence, thanks for listening to AM 950. What's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
And I'll just get right to the point. Just make a quick comment about the guy that says let the federal government fail monetarily. That would not work. Instead of letting it fail, we should let it evolve. And but I'll get back later. That's another topic.
Okay.
But what I want to say is, Mitch McConnell refuses to even bring a vote up to end the shutdown because the Democrats did it. Now I'll tell you why. Now we need to follow the trail of Mitch McConnell, and what he has in common is him, Elaine Chao, Boris Yeltsin, and George Herbert Walker Bush. All of these people have something in common. Elaine Chao, married to Mitch McConnell. Elaine Chao in the Peace Corps from 1991 through 1992, a year in the Peace Corps. What she did was she went over there, established their democracy the American way, and changed their currency from the ruble to their current currency. And Yeltsin was never satisfied with that. Now, after she got done with that, George W. Bush, he now instills her as Secretary of Labor. She didn't do much there. And she is now instilled as the Transportation Secretary. And I'll tell you why that's important. The aviation industry has what's called the 5 freedoms. There are actually more than 5, but the 5 are the most important, where each state, meaning Russia and the United States, agreed to say, hey, you can fly your airplanes here and you can fly your airplanes there without any other subjugation. In other words, you can make the revenue point. It used to be that you couldn't fly from the United States to Russia. You can only stop in a state sponsored by the United States, such as England, or a state sponsored by Russia. So Elaine Chao in office now, she's trying to get rid of that. So now the Americans would control the airways in the vicinity of Russia and the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia.
Wow, they're already getting so skitsy about how we've violated the agreement not to put NATO on their borders. That would push them right over the top.
Tom, I'm glad you said it. I think I just explained it well. So I'll just cut to the chase here. That's why you're not going to see Mitch McConnell say anything that's going to be a detriment to his wife. His wife may be implicated, too, in some serious crimes. and some serious mismanagement of government funds if it's found that she did something illegal like she did with her stocks. So if you follow Elaine Chao, you will follow Mitch McConnell's reason for not letting Merrick Garland come up, for not letting this come to a vote, and for any other thing that he may do in the future. Now, let's keep an eye on Elaine Chao and see how Mitch McConnell acts, and I guarantee you we'll find a trail there.
Fascinating stuff, Lawrence. Fascinating stuff. I don't, at the level of, of digging into this that you've done, I can't match. So I can't either confirm or argue with anything you've said. But I know that Elaine Chao has been around Republican circles for a long, long time. And yes, she's married to Mitch McConnell, and she's got a very sketchy background, and has made a lot of money doing this. So we'll see where it goes. Lawrence, thanks for the call. Jim in Malden, Mass. Hey, Jim, you're on the air. What's up?
Yeah, I just had a thought after you mentioned that Trump had said to Chuck Schumer that he'd be willing to keep the government shut down for months or years. I wonder if he would potentially use that as an exit strategy to, sort of avoid having to resign in an embarrassment. He looks really strong defending his wall. The Republicans look good for putting their country over their party by going along with the Democrats to impeach him, and he looks really good, for his base. So he doesn't have to, be embarrassed. And I don't know if you put any. Do you think that has any merit at all? Or
yeah, I don't know. He's still riffied. I haven't heard his press conference. The last riff he did, his cabinet meeting the day before yesterday, it was just filled with lies and empty rhetoric. It's the real shame here is that there's hundreds of thousands of families that are in distress right now as a consequence of, Donald Trump playing chicken or trying to play chicken. I mean, the Democrats are saying, fine, here, open the government. We just passed the legislation, which is identical in language. It's an absolute clone of the language that the Republicans passed last year. This is exactly what you said you were willing to sign before Laura Ingraham started yelling at you. And by the way, she lost her radio show. I mean, it's like, really? But, this is the legislation you were willing to sign. And he's like, no, I'm not going to sign that. That doesn't have my wall in it. I want my wall. And I think that we're getting over it. I think we're definitely getting over it. We'll see how it plays out, Jim. Thanks a lot for the call. From Jim to Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hey, Tom, my friend, you still are the smartest man in all the media, I must say, and you do have the smartest callers.
Including yourself, Jim. What's up?
Truly so. Michigan and Wisconsin, we have to figure out how to take over the legislature. How can they possibly pass these laws, obviously written by the Koch brothers and Alec? How could they pass similar laws simultaneously?
They do this, Jim. They've always had this power. I mean, the politicians in these states have always had this power. They've just never had leadership of their parties that was so willing to disrespect democracy, small d democracy, and use that power in a way that is clearly contrary to the will of the people and contrary to the interests of the people. It's just never been done before. It's pretty shocking what's going on. But it's the precedent that Mitch McConnell set by holding Merrick Garland back for almost an entire year is the whole thing is breathtaking.
It is, Tom, and let me throw solutions there. One is Bernie or someone, the new Democratic Congresswoman
Ocasio-Cortez,
please say, steal my vote, you go to jail.
Yeah.
That's all.
Well, that's H.R. 1. That's the first piece of legislation that was introduced this year, and it tightens up. Here's the quick list of the stuff that H.R. 1 does. No chance the Republicans are going to pick this up in the Senate, which is tragic because this is much needed. Automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, online voter registration, 15 days of early voting, end gerrymandering. voting rights for post-release felons, prevent voter purges, public financing for House campaign candidates who don't take big donations, tighten the rules on dark money, force disclosure on digital campaign ads, expand the definition of a lobbyist to close this loophole that's being used, new powers and disclosures for the Office of Government Ethics, and a code of ethics for the Supreme Court. This is really, really important stuff. Oh, and requiring presidential candidates to disclose 10 years of tax returns, applying conflict of interest rules to the president and vice president, and preventing the vice president and president from contracting with the government. This is a summary that was put together over on Daily Kos by Laura Clausen, also another brilliant writer over on Daily Kos. So anyhow, there it is, Jim.
State legislatures in Michigan and Wisconsin, they're so gerrymandered.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Well, this federal law would actually force the states to adopt nonpartisan commissions to write their districts, to redraw their districts in a nonpartisan way. And I think its time has come. I mean, Eldridge Gerry was back in the late 1700s, or the early 1800s, drawing the map in Massachusetts to look like a salamander. And, it's still going on. I mean, it's got to come to an end. Jim, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Joe in Cupertino, California. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Happy New Year, Tom, to you and yours. Just wanted to say it's Anything Goes Friday, hit or miss. I've been very interested in your explanation in the last few days here with this PAYGO, but I follow both congressmen quite closely, and it appears there's a little difference between Roe and Congressman Pocan. I'm not sure if that's a demonstration vote from Roe that says that, he doesn't want to do PAYGO because he's got a degree in economics, and he was a Chamber of Commerce or a Commerce Secretary in the Obama administration. I think he knows what he's talking about. He and the young lady from Hawaii and this young lady from New York seem to be the only three that are willing to step what I would say is Bernie's position, which is that you can't give a tax break of $1.5 trillion to the business and 7 conflicts at war, and then tell us that we have to struggle for health care, we have to struggle for students to go to school.
I agree, and on the point of the PAYGO law, that's absolutely all true. My understanding, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, and certainly the two, Ro Khanna is a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. The two chair people are Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan, and they're both saying what I've been saying. Actually, I got it from them. I mean, Mark Pocan educated us about it on this program, that the PAYGO law allows the House or the Senate to waive the rules of PAYGO. And all legislation, according to the Constitution, that has to do with money, which would involve PAYGO, has to originate in the House of Representatives. So if the legislation does not have an explicit waiver of PAYGO in it, then it goes to the Senate, and the Senate will impose their own PAYGO on it. It'll simply get written into it. And boom, you've got exactly the scenario you're describing. But if you keep the PAYGO rule in place in the House of Representatives, at least until you can blow up the law, and yes, we need to repeal the law, but if you keep the rule in place, then the House can pass legislation that includes a sentence in it that says, and we are using our authority under our PAYGO rule to waive the PAYGO law. So we're doing the same thing that Trump did, saying, yeah, we're going to spend $1.5 trillion and we're just going to borrow it. It's not going to be paid for as it goes. And if the Democrats were to have blown up that rule, they would have found themselves, up a creek without a paddle. And that's why I think only 3 members of the entire Democratic caucus voted against the rules package. And yeah, it was a symbolic vote, and I suspect that they all, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ro Khanna, and Tulsi Gabbard, I'm guessing that all 3 of them just basically, they took this stand based on this article by David What's-His-Name over in The Intercept that was only partially correct. And unfortunately, once you kind of take a stand, you gotta stand up and follow it or whatever. I don't know. I'm guessing, Joe, thanks for the call. I'm guessing Ro Khanna is going to be on the program next week. If he is, next Friday, okay, I'm sure this will be a topic of conversation. We'll be back. It's 47 minutes past the hour and change.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news, and it's Anything Goes Friday. Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Jim in Spencer, North Carolina. Hey, Jim, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, great. I want you to explain I understand the two Santa Claus theory. The part that I'm having confusion with is when the Republicans are out, is that not sort of what PAYGO is? You can't spend unless you...
Yep, absolutely. PAYGO is the two Santa Claus theory put into legislation.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was, and I read your article over in Truth Dig, and I still couldn't get it out of there, so I'll give them a call and make sure I know that I'm right.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. In fact, I should have included that in the article.
I've got the dream ticket for 2020.
Okay.
And I think it'll happen. All right, we've got Elizabeth Warren who's running. I say she wins, and she'll pull Bernie in as the VP. That way, no one can complain about he's too old to be president.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a possibility. That's a possibility. Although there's some great new young talent in the party as well. You've got Beto O'Rourke. He's not as progressive as I'd like up to this point, but who knows? I mean, things change. There's Julian Castro, I believe, is the one of the two Castro brothers who is indicated an interest in running. So, there's some young guys. Then you got, like Jay Inslee. I mean, he's kind of a middle-aged guy, but, he's out there. Pramila Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, and I'm not sure who else would be considered, kind of first tier. But there's...
Yeah, but I'm looking more at the progressive wing of it.
Among the progressives... Yeah, among the progressives, you're looking at Jay Inslee, you're looking at Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. It's Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown would be a very, very good candidate. He's a solid guy. He's a genuine progressive. Has been his whole entire life. He's got great credentials in that area, and he's from the Midwest. He's from Ohio. He's a Democrat who wins in Ohio every election.
Yeah. What about your governor? I've heard some good things about him.
You're talking about Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State?
Of Oregon.
Oh, the governor here is a woman. Kate Brown is our governor, yeah. And I don't think that she has any aspirations. You may be thinking, actually, of Jeff Merkley, who's one of our senators. And Jeff Merkley, Jeff Merkley's kicking the idea around, too. It's fairly obvious. And Jeff Merkley is a great progressive. I would work for Jeff Merkley in a heartbeat. It's like, so we have this embarrassment of riches here on the progressive side. And, the only thing that'll screw it up is there's a lot of things that could screw it up. We'll see where it goes.
One more thing, then what have you ever thought about this theory, is that the person that decides they're going to run, let's say it's Elizabeth Warren, and before she starts the campaign, go ahead and name the VIP.
You mean the VP, Vice President?
The VP.
Yeah.
The VP, and then they just run the whole across the country until election time.
Yeah. Well, typically the vice presidents are not nominated until the election, until the convention.
After the primary.
Yeah, after the primary has been decided.
Break tradition, and do it early.
Yeah. Desperate times and all that. I don't know, Jim. We'll see. I am not, a political strategist at that level. I can't, easily say here are the upsides and the downsides of that. But I think that there's something to be said for it. It's one of those conversations that would be fascinating to have with an actual political scientist. Jim, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. Fred in Rapid City, South Dakota. Hey, Fred, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Good. What's on your mind?
For the earlier caller who said he couldn't get his millennials to vote, his millennial buddies, I would tell him that, tell them that we could have had free high-speed internet, but I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but some governor in the state wanted to sign a bill that it would be like the interstate highway system, and then everyone would be able to use it and would be paid for by taxes.
Yep, there's some cities that have done that. Chattanooga is probably the most high-profile one, where they've got gigabyte speed, fiber optics, internet going into every house in the city, and it's cheap. It's like, you know, $25-30 a month for the best, some of the best internet service in the country, and it's causing businesses to want to move there. So yeah, we could have had that. We could have had free college education, and we could have had free health care if enough of us had voted over the last 30 years.
Right. That was just my point, just to get the millennials. I know they like free high-speed internet service.
Yeah, or super discounted. I mean, why spend $100 a month for high-speed internet when you know it really should cost $20 or $30, which is what it costs in most other countries. You know, in South Korea, in most European countries, it's very, very inexpensive because they allow competition. Here, we actually support monopolies. Spot on, Fred. That's an excellent one. Thank you for the call. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's up?
Nam yo rengekyo, y'all.
Back at you, James.
Tom, we need to take a strong lesson from history. After the McCarthy hearings, they scapegoated McCarthy, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, whatever. That gave us Richard Nixon down the road. We can't allow that to happen again.
So what am I missing here? You're talking about the McCarthy Army hearings that Senator Joe McCarthy chaired, where he was looking for communists in the State Department and the military. He got taken down by Mr. Welch, as I recall. You know, have you no shame at long last, Senator? And then you're suggesting that the Republicans were so offended by McCarthy being taken down that they voted for Nixon in 1960? Is that? Or
no. What I'm saying is Richard Nixon was neck deep in that stuff.
Oh yeah,
and he wasn't held accountable.
Well, he was
held accountable. Do we allow them to scapegoat somebody? We
yeah,
can't
but
do
at that time he was vice president.
No, he wasn't.
Yeah, he was. Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president. He was vice president from 52 to 60.
Should have still taken him down. A question for you, Tom.
Sure.
Can you tell me why you consider pride to be a virtue?
Well, I think there's toxic pride and there's healthy pride. Just like with most emotions, you know, a healthy form of pride has some basis, you know, pride of accomplishment. You know, an unhealthy form of pride would be, you know, like what Donald Trump has, you know, basically masking insecurity. Why do you ask?
The aphorism is pride goes before a fall. It
Right.
doesn't say sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, and that would be the unhealthy kind of pride, I think. But you know, most people, if they do a really good job, they look at it and go, "Hey, I did a good job." You know, there's pride in that. That's a very, very, in fact, it's an internally motivating thing. James, thanks for the call. Thanks to all of you. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all your calls today. We've still got a full board of calls. We will get to you next week, same time, same place. And in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful, happy, blessed, family-filled, friend-filled weekend, or whatever you like the best. And number two, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. We've all got to wake up the rest of the country. Come on, we got work to do here. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. See you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.